long as the battery lasts 3 hours, I think it's going on.
Ladies and gentlemen,
It's actually easy to read.
I'm going to call the meeting to order. If we could do the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I first want to say that Lorraine Cost has asked to be excused. She's out of state. Terry Casto has asked to be excused as well. He is out of country. And Charles Benuto.
Here.
All right. John Byron.
Yo.
Vinnie Taranto.
Here.
John Windsor.
Here.
David Lane.
Here.
Karen McLaughlin. Here. Stephanie Healy.
Here.
John Durkee.
Present.
Courtney Barker. Present. Todd Swingle.
Here.
Dean Artuza. Here. Danielle Bowden.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. In looking at the agenda, I would like to propose a change. And I would like for us to, if it's the will of the committee, to move general public comment before old business. Allot 20 minutes of time for general public comment. If we go over that amount, then we could have another public comment at the end where it normally would be. But this way, it would give individuals an opportunity to speak before we go into the old business.
Do you need a motion on that?
I believe we're going to, we'll need it.
Make a
Yes.
motion.
Will this be permanent?
Let's try it for today and see how it goes. Okay. Do I have a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. So, given that, I will also entertain a motion for approval of the agenda with that change being made.
So moved.
In a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we have an agenda. I will also entertain a motion for approval of the minutes.
Motion to approve.
Second?
Your turn this month, John.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Are there any corrections to the minutes? Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are unanimously approved. All right, Virginia.
Hey, thank you. So the first two items were completed this month with the update of the Lagoon plan and budget change requests submitted to the board for approval, which occurred last Tuesday, the 10th, and we will talk about that more under old business. So I'm going to sort of jump through here and just highlight what I think are the highlights. We can talk about any of the other ones. You received the sewage discharge data compiled from all the city responses. That information was also shared with the county commission before their discussion on the 10th. So they have that information as well. We are working to take the previous county utilities report that you received just after the hurricane and insert that information into the city responses, but we just haven't had a chance to do that yet. So we'll provide you a revised report that juxtaposes the county experience with the city responses as well. The online public tool for living shorelines, it is online, and we intend to present that to you today. If we can get online to present it, the county server crashed this morning, and so there are a bunch of IT people frantically trying to get that back up for us this morning. Surveys have begun. In order to do living shorelines, you have to survey during the spring, summer growing season, so after April 1st, to look for seagrass to make sure you're not going to locate your living shoreline where seagrass is trying to grow. And so we've begun those seagrass and shoreline surveys. MIMS bunk dredging, we have a dredge.
They will likely start dredging the beginning of next week. They're out there getting some of their turbidity controls in place and locating the edge of seagrass before they can start dredging. So likely on Monday we'll see some material being moved.
How much is the total amount of material we're estimating comes out of there? Do you remember?
It's approximately 31,000 cubic yards.
Have they found any seagrass?
There actually is some up there.
So the contractor is not mapping seagrass. Seagrass was mapped in, I believe it was August of 2016. There is a previous seagrass edge that was mapped as part of the permit, and we're holding them to that, whether or not there's seagrass there or not.
We met with the Air Force last week to talk about coordinating with them on any kinds of projects in the plan that could be done up on their federal holdings. And we have a meeting with NASA, a similar discussion scheduled with them in about a week. Next week, we're driving to Jacksonville to meet with U.S. Fish and Wildlife to talk about our programmatic permitting process for muck removal. So we've already met with the Army Corps, we've already met with DEP, and next is U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So that process is moving along nicely. We continue to plan for our Waterfest event that will be May 19th at Kiwanis Park. So I encourage you to come out and tell other people to come out. That's a great event coordinated with Hook Kids on Fishing. So I think we have about 80 fishing poles that will be distributed and lessons to kids on how to fish, and a lot of fun things going on.
Virginia, who's the lead on that event?
Well, it's usually Matt Culver, but now that we have a Lagoon team, Brandon is in the lead, and the team is helping.
All right, so anybody that wanted to exhibit or something like that should reach out to Brandon?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Have you had a connection with Anglers for Conservation and Mike Kinane
Yes.
on this? Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent.
That's their Hook Kids on Fishing. That's their
Yes.
event. Yes. And we are in the peak of budget development process for 18-19. So our financial person isn't even here today because she's over there frantically counting beans and putting numbers in tables. So that's always a fun time of year. Just wanted to highlight a couple science forums and public events coming up. So lots and lots of Earth Day celebrations going on this weekend, including the Marine Resources Council is having an event at their Lagoon House on April 21st. And then not quite in our backyard, but further south from here, the Regional Planning Council is hosting a regional biosolids symposium on June 8th, and we will have staff attending that. That topic is of more interest and concern in the southern part of the lagoon, but it is of interest to people up here as well. So wanted to make sure people knew that was happening. And then we can talk about, I'm hoping for some direction about this under old business, but previously the Oversight Committee had asked that we have a panel on sewage overflows and sewer challenges, asked the DEP to come in and the cities, and so our intent is to do that in May. So this is just a little heads up. If you have thoughts on how you want that to happen, be thinking about what sort of direction you want to give us when we get to that item under old business. All right, and with that, I was going to move to the financial report.
Virginia, before before.
Yes.
Let me back up. 12 project monitoring wells contracted. Where are those? Are those,
That will be presented in item 6B.
okay.
They're distributed around the county. So we now have over $4 million worth of projects in contract. The big thing I wanted to highlight is the graph. So when we adopted the plan, we anticipated $34 million a year in revenue, and that's the red line, the lowest line. We've now revised that anticipated revenue to the blue line. The green line is what the state revenue projection office put out, and so we are, the purple, which is hard to see because it overlays so closely to the blue line, the purple is actuals. So we now have a line, our projections are tracking actuals very, very closely, and they are less than the state projection, but considerably more than our original projection.
Dumb question, why don't we have a budget line in here? I mean, there are dollar figures in the budget as well, and for revenue, yes?
Yes. Would you want, we don't have, the budget's not broken down by month the way this is, so we could show,
You could straight
we could
line
just
it.
put an annual,
You just, yeah, straight line it.
Okay.
I think that would be useful because it tells us whether we're running ahead or behind on receipts against budget, which is a useful thing to know if you're trying to oversee it.
well, the budget is, well, I guess it's conceivable the budget could be more than revenue projections, but we try to be conservative so that doesn't happen. You're actually talking about budget versus actuals.
We have an official county budget for the current fiscal year, and we've got
Yes.
one for next year that is in work right now, and it's going to come up with a number. Talk to the comptroller. If he thinks that's a silly idea, fine, but when I look at things like this, that's usually what I see.
So
So are you asking for the expense budget or the revenue budget?
The revenue budget
So the revenue budget is the blue line.
is the blue line.
Yes.
That's the revenue budget.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's official, that's what's
Yes.
baked in.
So what the county commission did on the 10th
Yeah.
was they approved changing our revenue projection from from the red line to the
Okay.
blue line.
Yeah, I think the expenditures doesn't make sense. You get in the world of obligations versus et cetera. Yeah.
And
Good.
the purple line's actual.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's just showing that our revenues are coming in like we projected them to be.
To the updated projection.
Right.
It might help if it said approved budget rather than original projections.
Would be the updated projection would be / approved budget.
Whatever. Somewhere it
We
needs
know
to
what
get
it
pinned
means.
down to what the county has approved.
All right, I'm struggling to find a little icon, there we go. So I wanted to give you a Bloom update, and one of the great things about continuous monitoring stations is that if I graphed it this morning, you would get what happened last night. Unfortunately, when I came in early this morning to graph that, the internet connection was down and the server was bad. So this is the most recent graph that I happened to save, which was from last weekend. And so you can see that the dissolved oxygen was going down, 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 down. This is a graph of May 1st through last Saturday. And so I have a pointer. Down here, this was the 9th, 10th, when dissolved oxygen got extremely low in the Sykes Creek area, which was recorded more so by the Barge Canal sensor than by the Sykes Creek sensor. The Sykes Creek Orca sensor is down in Newfound Harbor, really closer to the Banana River, whereas the one in the Barge Canal was picking up that signal better for us.
Virginia, do you have any information on the temperature of the water in those areas?
Yes, that's online. Yes.
I just tried
This
to
was-
realize that there's a correlation there. But this,
No. This was Monday, Tuesday of last week when we were
Yes.
all real worried in the first.
Yes,
Yeah,
and
got
we
it.
had some
Yep.
fish mortality. And so, we saw these dissolved oxygen levels dropping. We had several cloudy days. We knew there was a high risk. And yes, we had fish mortality. Fortunately, that cold front came in, and a little wind and some cooler weather drove those dissolved oxygen temperatures, or dissolved oxygen levels back up. The chlorophyll, which I really wish I could show you, peaked back in early March. And so the bloom levels that had peaked around 5 million cells per milliliter for the brown tide have been coming steadily down, down, down. And so in micrograms per liter, which is what these sensors measure, the peaks were up in the 400s, and we're now down below 100. So 80, 90, that's still a bad measurement. That's still definitely bloom conditions, but it's way better than what it was. So hopefully we'll continue to see those bloom concentrations drop.
And those are diurnal fluctuations?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So those algal cells are photosynthesizing during the day, creating oxygen, and then respiring at night, using up oxygen.
Yeah, and Virginia, the St. John's monitor that's in open water in the Banana just south of this tracks almost exactly the same, but the numbers never got quite that low.
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, so St. John's has a station near 520 in the Banana River, and then they have another one over in Titusville. The way that graphic interface works on the internet, you get a 30-day chart. No matter what you want, you get a 30-day chart. The Orca ones allow you to pick your start date, and so you can bracket the range of dates that you're most interested in. One more thing I wanted to share before we move to the next agenda item. So today's presentations are about our monitoring and what we're learning, the performance-based information that we're gathering as we implement these projects. And our muck research team at Florida Tech has recently submitted a paper for a journal. And so the title of the paper is Environmental Dredging to Remove Fine-Grained Organic Rich Sediments and Reduce Inputs of Nitrogen and Phosphorus to a Subtropical Estuary. It's by Austin Fox and John Treffry. And I just wanted I got their permission to share with you these words out of the conclusion. So successful aspects of the dredging process are as follows. 75% of the muck was removed from the dredged area. 200 tons of nitrogen and 50 tons of phosphorus were removed with those muck sediments. A large volume of muck was prevented from entering the Indian River Lagoon, and a sediment trap was created to catch future inputs of muck components from upstream. As you all know, there were then hurricanes, and it rearranged things out there, and so decreases in benthic flux of nitrogen and phosphorus were less effective. However, follow-up dredging at this point, when they wrote this, is underway now that follow-up dredging is complete to help compensate for the impact of hurricanes on post-dredging muck distribution. So, we continue to learn, but there are great things happening out there. And there's been previous discussion about peer review, right? So I just shared with you early results that have not yet been published in a peer-reviewed journal. We certainly hope they will be published in a peer-reviewed journal. But we do incorporate peer review throughout our process. And I wanted to defer to Dr. Windsor because he's been overseeing that peer review process. If you could.
Yeah, and the process I'm overseeing is the muck research at FIT, which is not sponsored by the trust fund. It's money from outside. And as responsible scientists, all of our scientists requested of me to seek external reviewers for this process. And so I found external reviewers, and they've reviewed our work from day one of the project on through. And so I've got external reviewers who have more than, it's probably getting close to 100 years or more than 100 years of experience between them. Several of the names would be recognizable to many people in the room, but I'm not sharing their names. It's not normal in a peer review process that you blast what peers send to each other in comments, but they've been very critical, positive and negative critical, on these projects from day one. So to suggest that the FIT guys are not doing any peer-reviewed work is wrong.
Thank you.
Okay?
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Because that's been blasted on Facebook over and over and over again. And it's good to have a response to that because it's
I think you'll
ridiculous.
find most of the government agencies who contract with universities seek external reviews of the university's work, and they actually build that into contract language and all that sort of thing. So this is not an unusual process. We wanted to make sure it was carried out very carefully, and so I've been responsible for that.
Is there peer review of the basic efficacy of muck removal as a primary element of the lagoon plan? There's a lot of noise in the air about why you're dealing with muck at all.
Well, the plan itself, if you look, and I've forgotten the number of scientists who reviewed, some of them are in the room here, but there's quite a lengthy list of scientists who reviewed the plan, agreed with the plan, supported the plan. Their names are listed in the report, and so I don't want to speak for them, but I assume since they endorsed and supported the plan,
that would be de facto peer review.
yeah. Thank you.
That's my report.
Thank you so much. All right. Dr. Claudia Listopad.
Good morning, everyone. I'm actually going to be covering items A and B. So even though the presentation has more slides, I'm going to talk about both topics. And Dr. Lisa Soto, with whom I worked throughout these projects, is here to address more questions. We thought it was more efficient to flow it all together. So today's talk is actually covering several different topics under the groundwater, monitoring groundwater pollution, and how to do it in a scientifically valid way, and what kind of preliminary results we have. So I'm dividing the talk into three parts, so bear with me. First part is going to talk about debris swept, which you have heard so much about, the septic-to-sewer conversion, and the preliminary results we have from that. Second part is going to be on the Turkey Creek, which is our pilot project for the big groundwater study plan, and what results we currently have. We have 10 months of sampling done on there. And the third part is on the part B, which is the new groundwater monitoring plan, and where we are at that, and how we are selecting communities and which ones those are. So, pre-swept, and this project has been partially funded by the City of Rockledge, jointly with, basically the project itself, the retrofit, was funded by the City of Rockledge and subsidized also by the Save Our Lagoon plan. The monitoring has been expanded and augmented by your plan as well. So, debris swept is a community that was found to be a priority community for retrofit by the City of Rockledge for several reasons. One of them is pretty dense, 3.5 to 4 houses per acre. It's located right near the lagoon. And also the soils have very little organics, so there's, the septics, if there's any leaking, it runs immediately through the soil. It has less than 1% organics in those soils. It also was built in the 50s and early 60s, so that's another reason why it was picked as a priority. It was the first project to be designed to measure success of a septic-to-sewer retrofit. What I mean by that is there was thought put into it, how are we going to see we made a difference by retrofitting this community? And so we used what we call typically a before and after control impact design. And that means we tried to monitor before and after the retrofit, and we also wanted to have some control wells, some control areas where we could see, well, nothing was done here. Do we see the same changes on these other wells? So this is a community here. You can see the black dots all over here are where the septic tanks were located. So most of these parcels actually had 2 septic tanks, some 3. So very dense. Those are just, different colors are just the ages of the community. The oldest are in red, orange, and so forth. So you can see there is a variation. So how we placed the wells was based on modeling. We did, before we had any data, we tried to use some defaults and run what we call the ArcInlet, which is the ArcGIS-based nitrate load estimation toolkit, a really long name. But this model was funded by FDEP and created by FSU to particularly look at the transport from septic loads into water bodies. So what we did is we modeled and we looked at the plumes and we tried to place the wells where the plumes were the highest, with some caveats. Obviously, we needed access and so forth. And so what we did here is as I said, we wanted to select wells inside the community and wells outside in the area that was on septic, that was not to be retrofitted, at least not immediately. And so the well in red are the 3 wells located, what I call the impact wells or the re-swept wells, and the 2 green ones are those control wells, which is also in the community, the closest community we could find on the water that was on septic. So there's pictures of installation of the wells. So the installation took place in June 2017, and we were trying to do this as quickly as we could because the work was already underway when we were installing the wells. They had already put all the mains in it, and they hadn't started connecting the individual houses, but they were soon they were on the timeline. So in other words, it's really important to plan these projects as far in advance as possible so you have time to put wells in, to get enough samples before you start connecting houses. So post-connection monitoring was initiated after all the septic tanks were abandoned. And so we did the pre-monitoring through the summer. And so it was June through the end of August. And by the end of October, all the septic tanks had been abandoned. And so we waited a month or 2 to start sampling again, and we are in the post-sampling period right now. So these are some of the parameters that we are looking through. Those are the typical parameters that we look, the field parameters, and like turbidity, DO, and so forth. And then in the lab, we were looking specifically at nitrogen and nitrogen species, and fecal coliform as just an indicator. Are we seeing here some sewage component? And see, these are some of before and after results. And this graph, I know, has a lot of things in it, so I go through it. So what I'm showing here is 2 lines. One line, the blue line, is the wells inside re-swept, so think of those impact wells. And the red line is actually a reference wells. So what we see here are the different sampling events. So we had 6 sampling events before all the connections were done, and only 2 so far. So this is really preliminary. The post-sampling, I want to emphasize, we have only had 2 sampling events, January and March. And so those are the post-sampling events. So that's the dashed line breaks the before and after.
Are
now,
there 2 reference wells? Are those the ones south of the area, your controls? Or?
Correct. Those are the red. Those are the reference wells. So I want to point out that you see similar patterns, okay, in all of them. The important part here is that before, so we were monitoring this during the wet season. And as the wet season was progressing, and that's why you're seeing this increase, it was getting wetter and wetter, and our concentrations of nitrogen was going up. And this is typical. We see this typically. So we weren't surprised about that. And so far, we only have dry season post-connection. So sampling events. So we do see a drop right here, right? You see a drastic drop in total nitrogen. Now, there is a drop also on the reference wells. The drop in the reference wells is not nearly as steep, as high the magnitude of the drop as the ones in the pre-soaked wells. So we are cautiously optimistic, right? We have 2 sampling events. We need to keep sampling, particularly during the wet season, to see how different these are. And another point that I want to make, those gray bars that I put in there is just to show you the percentage of septic tanks that were abandoned. So as we were furiously sampling before everything was connected, they had to start doing the work to complete everything by October. So that puts in a little, caveat. So it's much better to get a year of sampling before you have to start connecting. So a lesson learned here. Yes.
So the first sampling was done in June?
Correct.
Okay.
Early June. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so extremely preliminary, but once we get to June, we'll actually be able to compare essentially month to month, quarter to quarter.
Particularly if we adjust for rainfall. That's really important. So in June, we had very little rainfall. We did have a first flush, so there was one of the wells that peaked, and then we progressively had more and more cumulative rainfall, particularly 72 hours before these events.
Can you come back to this group in August or September with updated information?
Sure.
Okay.
I just had a quick question. Is there any way the reference well could be influenced by the pre-swept wells at all?
I think the 2 reference wells are a little bit unique. One of them is very similar, but the other one is we really wanted to see what happens near the water interface. So putting a well there, we are seeing influence from actually the lagoon.
Okay.
So that well, so when we see, and so that's also another lesson learned. I don't think I would install a well that close to the lagoon. We see that by measuring our conductivity. We're seeing some, particularly if it's with the tidal influence there. Yeah.
That's very interesting. But that's interesting in itself, though, is to see how,
Right. So we can see if I had showed each of the points, it actually is more interesting, but it would be a little confusing to show each of the well locations because we have the 3 wells and where they started connecting, and this was done in conjunction. The city did work with me, and they tried to connect it as far as possible from where we were monitoring, starting in the western end, but it was in the northwestern end. And so the first well we started seeing differences, particularly in fecal drops and ammonia drops, was the one that was closest.
Right.
So we could see that as they abandoned a drop. And this is fecal. And so fecal coliform can just be used as a broad indicator. Typically, we need more lines of evidence to say, aha, this is the source. You could have other sources for fecal coliform. But if we did have several hits throughout the pre. That's really the main point in here. But since we connected, we have had 0 fecal in our reference wells, and just in our last event, we did have a hit from fecal in our in our reference wells. I'm sorry. In pre-swap, we haven't had any fecal at all. So that's been good. So usually fecal does come. You see those spikes going up and down. It's very much connected with rainfall, particularly 72 hours prior. So if we have a big rain event, we typically see fecal go up. So we'll see if we have a big rain event next time. We are collecting again in May. If there's rain prior to it, then hopefully we won't see any fecal evidence. So those are some preliminary results. We also updated the model run. So we had, prior to this, we used pretty much the model run just to try to site the wells, and we actually used the data that we collected, the depth to water, and the concentrations to run this model again. I've learned a lot from it. One of them was that the initial model prediction said that pretty much all the loads would coming in as ammonia, and that has flipped completely as we found the depth to water is a lot deeper. So most of the water quality, the loads coming in are actually coming in as nitrate. So that's kind of what it looks like, the plumes, just to give you an idea. And this just is a table that compares the before and after means Breeze swept is on the left, and the reference well is on the right. And what you can see, the ammonia numbers were never very high, but those dropped to the point that they are all below. I mean, I put 0.04, but it really is at detection, below detection limit. So we can't really detect below that. So it has dropped completely. In the reference wells, they actually had a slight increase in the post-sampling on ammonia. Nitrate, we had a huge drop, and that's what the model is predicting right now, and that's what we're measuring, and most of the loads are coming as nitrate. We had a drop of 1.94 milligrams per liter in nitrate in the 2 post-sampling events compared to the pre-sampling in Breeze swept. The drop that we had in the reference wells was much smaller, 0.62. So 0.4 is pretty much what we're seeing in background well locations. So this is pretty encouraging. Also, the fecal coliform, like I said, that's a percentage of events that were non-detects. We have right now that were detects. I apologize, the opposite. So we went from 83% of the time we used to have some fecal in it, and now we haven't seen any hits yet. The difference, we still see hits in the reference wells. So those are like summary, broad overview results, and we'll keep sampling to look at it. So we have sampling events through another 10 events still coming up. Okay, so part 2.
Yeah,
I don't know if you have questions. If you want to interrupt, feel free.
Did you consider a well in an area where there aren't any septic tanks just to get some natural background figures?
We have some of those installed in the Turkey Creek in this one, and we are also proposing to install some of those in the groundwater monitoring plan. Yes, that's really important because we need to know what's referenced. So you'll see some of the results on our first reference area in the Turkey Creek.
2 questions.
Yes.
We've got at least a couple come to mind, other septic-to-sewer hookups. We've got Myra and we've got St. Sebastian River, the marina there. Is this a one-off study or do you routinely check them also? That's question 1.
So we haven't, I think those, the Sebastian, what was the other project?
That's
Miko. I think there's some thought into perhaps monitoring Miko. I haven't heard anything about monitoring Sebastian.
Well, no, that's the same.
It's the same.
Oh, okay. I thought there were
Myra's
2.
the other.
Yeah.
Myra's
Okay.
already done.
Myra's the other one.
Oh, the Merritt Island?
Right.
Myra's done.
So there is, the monitoring plan is going to monitor some of these communities. The Miko is a little different because it is mixed use, so commercial. So I still think there is value in that, and because this study is looking at single-family residents are probably very different than looking at a commercial that has a lot. So they're less dense, but they might have a lot more use than an average of 2 people.
That would give us the value though for commercial.
Right.
We're struggling with that.
Right.
So I think there's.
So we have a draft scope from Cluadia to do MICO, and that's working its way through the system.
And that type of data can even change the way we're looking at things too, because if you see a big return on commercial, maybe
Right.
at commercial areas,
Because that is a really good point. On some of these places, it might vary a lot depending on use, and even this Turkey Creek septic neighborhood itself, I think the average was more 1 to 1.5 people, full-time residents living there. So that makes a big difference in how much use you're going to see.
Yeah, so mixing up the type of residential and the commercial, just the type of element.
And the model predictions usually use an average of 2.1 or 2.2 people using on a single family, totally different than what you would expect from a commercial. There's really no modeled data for it. Yes.
Second question.
Sorry.
Quick comment first.
Two questions.
If you're going to look at commercial, you may want to look at heavy metals too. Second question, one of the primary tools we use in looking at septic issues in the plan is distance from the river, from the shoreline. Is there anything in this monitoring, or could there be anything in this monitoring to validate that number and to see if our benchmark is rock solid or we ought to move it further away or what have you? And again, it looks like that would also be a function of soil type and elevation and stuff like that.
Yes, and
we're into thesis areas now, but
right. Actually, the groundwater monitoring plan is looking at all those and going through a process of prioritizing. And yes, I think that monitoring enough enough of these communities will give you a better sense of what is most important. Distance, soil type. I mean, there's several soil-related variables that have impact in the modeling. We need to check that against.
Since that is such a key metric in deciding whether or not we're going to throw our money at it, the trust fund's money at it, could we ask for a report when you think you got something that's good data?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Probably not for you, Claudia, but maybe somebody in Virginia's staff. Can we translate what she's just done into a reduction of nitrogen numbers that we can tag to a dollar number to see where this falls within what our budgeted projections are?
Yeah, that's,
Being done?
well, we need more data, we need more months of sampling before we do that. But yes, absolutely, that's part of what we want to do to, validate the performance of these projects.
And then the follow-up is, along with soil conditions, et cetera, water table, is there a way that we can look at water table where beaches and islands, et cetera, the water table is significantly higher than it is at this, at Rockledge, for example?
Yes, we're actually using water table also as one of the variables in the monitoring plan.
Thank you.
It's a very important one. Okay, Turkey Creek, part 2. So the Turkey Creek study is really what we are using as basis for this groundwater monitoring plan in terms of design, what we thought would be appropriate. But it was really set up under the impacts to look at impacts of the environmental muck dredging at Florida Tech. And so it was initiated in November 2016, and what we did was to establish 4 communities as close as possible to the Turkey Creek area, so we could see, are they different? Do they have different groundwater qualities? And so the communities that we set up are septic, one on septic, which is the red one up here. One that looked similar in density and soil type and distance to the creek, that's on sewer, and it's this purple one right here. And then we wanted to pick a reuse, a community that's on sewer and reclaimed, and the only community that's close to the creek in this area is basically this one, and these ones are a little further apart. So we picked this particular area. And in addition, we thought we really need to understand what's exactly what you said, reference, control area. So the Turkey Creek Sanctuary was also monitored for comparison.
The green.
Okay.
Yes. So
The green.
the green, yes, this whole area. So the dots are where the wells are currently installed. For siting the wells, we did similar process. We modeled it. We tried to site the wells where we could. There was a lot of involved process in trying to get permission to put wells in people's backyards, so there's that too. And so we ended up installing 11 wells in June, and we have been monitoring those monthly ever since. So this is a little bit about how we install. We use geoprobes to install to minimize the impact, and plywood to try not to tear anybody's yard. So it's an involved process there. We looked at soil type to confirm what type of soil we're looking at. In the model, we are using basically USDA soils and making a lot of assumptions. So we actually take cores and we look at the percentage of organic in the soils. And so far, it's been pretty close, actually, in this particular area, which makes me happy that we use that as a benchmark at least. And so these are some of the preliminary results. In this case, we have 10 months of sampling. The April results weren't out yet to put in here. But the 4 lines are the 4 different types of treatments. So green, natural, yellow, the reuse, red, septic, and the sewers in purple. And this is total nitrogen. So if you look at the total nitrogen, the first thing that comes to mind is that all 3 types of communities do have a potential to have impact on your groundwater in terms of total nitrogen. There's a huge difference, a statistically significant distance, no matter how I've tested it, between the controlled and natural wells and all other types of communities. So this was interesting. So they're all, different than the reference. That was my first. Now, just because in some cases, the septic and sewer are kind of close together, that doesn't mean they actually look the same once you start looking at different types of nitrogen coming out of them. And so this is ammonia results. In sewer, we have had quite high numbers of ammonia coming out in this community. And the septic, those numbers vary through time as well. And you reuse, we pretty much don't have any ammonia at all coming out. So, and natural is pretty much low in all types of nitrogen. And the interesting point is the nitrite values that we have had are very different, particularly on the reclaim. So this is when we decided that it would be beneficial to include in this groundwater monitoring plan this type of setup where we look at reclaim, sewer, and septic, as well as having some additional reference areas, so we better understand it. We would have thought that reuse and sewer, because reuse is on sewer, might have been similar. But this was definitely different. And these are some of the fecal numbers that we've seen. And again, that's what you expect with fecal. You have sometimes some hits and sometimes you don't. But we have had actually one hit once in one well in the reclaimed that was quite high. And we've had septic, particularly in September, October, very wet, right? And we've had some sewer hits coming in. And I have to point out that those numbers came up. We installed an additional well in each of the communities right in November, and so that's when we started seeing, so this particular well that we are seeing more hits in the sewer area. So there is value in capturing, this type of setup and looking at fecal and other lines of evidence to see what is happening. And one of the other lines of evidence that we have added to this particular project has been looking at isotopes, which particularly 15N and 18O. And just to give you, this is just looking at 15N. What you're looking at here is, in blue, is the signature in comparison to what the air number of 15N. And what I really want to point out from here is that there are differences in the signature of 15N. The natural is a 4.7%, reuse was 7, and septic was 12.7. Now, those numbers do change depending on the concentration of nitrate. So we are using nitrate to get the 15N concentration. So if we have higher numbers, we usually get higher numbers also 15N. So there is a lot of complexity in using isotopes. You can't just look at the number and say, aha, this is what it is. So we need to look at several lines of evidence. And this is why we added also, we have fecal, and we added also 18O, which is another type of isotope. And so when we put it on the scale, so what this is showing you is how you can differentiate sources better when you have more than one type of isotope you're looking at. For example, you have 15N on the bottom x-axis, and on the y-axis you have 18O right here. And what you can see that if you were just going to use 15N, and you pick the number, for example, 3, it could be soil, it could be mineralized fertilizer, or it could be rainfall. You don't know. It could be many things. So the fact that you have the 18O, you can start putting this on a plot and start understanding better what some of the numbers look like. So I want to point out we don't have the sewer neighborhood on here, which is a lot of people wanted to look. Let's look at sewer, because our nitrite numbers are so low for sewer. We didn't have anything high enough to be able to do isotopes so far in our first batch. Now that might have changed now, so this is just preliminary based on half of the samples, so we're sending more samples to the lab and getting more isotopic results. But what you can see here is how these samples, even within the same neighborhood, the septic, how they have quite a lot of range. And actually that range is, if you were to map when they were taken, it's through time. So as time goes on, typically the signature of 15N keeps increasing and 18O keeps increasing. That's why you see this arrow going up. You expect that through time the signatures change. So there's a lot of complexity in looking at isotopes. You have to use a lot of lines of evidence and actually get a lot of data through time to start looking at what are we looking at here. Okay, part 3 of the presentation, the monitoring plan. What are we doing now?
Could I ask a question or two?
Yes.
This seems to be telling us something about reuse water. And there ain't much in the plan that deals with it. And in general, the zeitgeist is that it's a cosmic good. I wonder if maybe we shouldn't be looking at that for future allocation of, both on a policy basis and possibly also a trust fund spending basis, to challenge the question whether reuse water is in fact solely a good with no downside.
I think we have.
I
think the plan does.
The original plan included 2 upgrades to 2 plants to reduce the concentrations in the reclaimed water at the Titusville Osprey plant and the Palm Bay Wharf. Both of those projects are under contract. In the 2018 update, Melbourne came in with a request to upgrade their plant, and so that was approved by the board, recommended by you and approved by the board. The one that looks, the next most interesting one, those were the 3 highest concentration. The next one is West Melbourne, and I've already met with their consultants, and they're looking at the possibility and whether they have space, and looking at trying to get some cost estimates together so we can determine whether that looks cost effective.
Do we know what those new numbers are going to be? I mean, how much of an improvement compared to the reuse from one of these upgrades?
Yes.
We know. So how much, or how better as far as removing the nitrogen?
Well, we know what it'll be coming out of the plant, going into the reuse lines.
Right.
What we don't know is how that will translate into groundwater. So one of the important things in collecting this information now in the areas where we are going to upgrade the reclaimed is we need that, a full year of pre-project data.
Okay.
So we, because when we started the planning process, we knew that reuse was an issue. And I want to just make sure everybody understands that all of the plants currently in the county are working within their permit. So they're allowed to do what they're doing right now. But we decided to focus on that because we knew it was an issue, and this basically is confirming that. And this is the amount of money we're putting into it isn't small. I mean, it's, each plant, I think, is about $8 to $12 million, if I'm not mistaken.
Titusville is $8 million, Palm Bay is $1.4, and I believe Melbourne is about $6 million.
Yeah.
Excellent. My memory is, all this goes back to the research that was done in Gainesville about uptake of nitrogen from plants in the middle of the roads, lawn, et cetera, not necessarily trees. So we hit this magic number of about 7. Anything above that goes into the lagoon. So we're not going to get down to that, but we're moving in that direction. Is my memory accurate?
Yes, so the Palm Bay upgrades will get them down to 7.5. The Titusville upgrades will get them down to 6. The Melbourne upgrades are aiming for about 6.
Yeah. Which is significant.
Milligrams per liter.
Oh, yeah, it's 30% to 40% reductions or more.
The Titusville and Palm Bay concentrations, pre-improvements are 21 to 29 milligrams per liter. So getting them down to 6 to 7 is...
Wow.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
So that monitoring, will that, as time moves on, when those improvements are done, will those wells give us information after the improvements? So that continued monitor, that's really neat. That's good.
Virginia, real quick, give me a quick idea of what Coco's reuse is. I noticed they weren't mentioned. I don't want to take up any time.
Yeah,
You rattled off all those numbers off your head. I thought you would
yeah, sorry. I know the hot ones. I don't know the less than hot ones. But it is in the plan, and the original plan only included the ones that were of a concentration that was high enough that based on those University of Florida studies, they were probably polluting the groundwater. In the 2018 update, because we kept getting questions, Cocoa Beach is missing. Yeah, Cocoa Beach is missing because they're already down at AWT. They're at 2.5 milligrams per liter. So we went ahead, we added all of them in the plan so everybody can see, what they so. All right, so your question was Cocoa?
Cocoa Beach.
Cocoa.
Jerry Sellers, Cocoa, they are at 3.5 milligrams per liter.
So they're already there.
So okay to use their water.
Well, and just a quick comment. I concur with the investment in the plants, and it's above permit requirements, but don't forget there's other low-hanging fruit related to reclaim. And if we have the data at some point as we're analyzing this, I'd love to see some of the usage patterns, because it's pretty common that reclaim is either free or very cheap. And as a result, usage as compared to other sources of irrigation is many times 2, 3, or even 4 times the application rates. And so even as we reduce nitrogen, there's still potentially opportunity for significant additional low-cost reductions related to behavioral changes. Spraying it in the road, that it runs straight into the lagoon. So whether you're at 3 or 10, it still has no value and it goes straight in. And the other is that when you, again, 3 or 10, yes, reducing it's great, but if it's over applied so much that the either runoff or infiltration rate is not getting used by the plants, then you've got higher contributions of those nutrients going straight to groundwater as opposed to productive use. So just don't forget there's another component of this.
Yeah, and so one of the 5 outreach components that you approved in the 2018 update is to look at those irrigation practices and do outreach to try to get people to understand the importance of what you just said.
I just wanted to clarify, I only mentioned the fact that they were working within their permit, so people understand we're not paying for a maintenance activity, we're paying for an enhancement to the water treatment plants for the lagoon to reduce their nitrogen use. So they're working within their permit, because and they don't have maintenance problems at the plant. What we're trying to do is basically enhance their work, basically. Yeah.
And I want to cycle back 6 or 8 months. Courtney had talked about some sampling they had done, I think in Satellite Beach, and that well water was relatively high in nitrogen, thus you don't need to fertilize your yard if you're using well water. And when you looked into building test stuff, is there anything that you've discovered in the sanctuary area that would indicate that there's enough nitrogen in there naturally that if you're on well water, there's really no use for fertilizer in residential areas?
We haven't looked at that as not being part of the study. The fact is, in this particular reclaim community, though, that people are using fertilizer abundantly, because we see all the time, services, professional services in the community every time we go sample everywhere. So they aren't aware that because they have this high reclaimed, high nitrogen water, that they don't need to use fertilizer. Actually, the HOA is paying for additional fertilizer to be put in there.
And they don't need that because clearly it's already there.
Sometimes it actually looks burnt.
Yeah.
But the concentrations that you're getting in the sanctuary are extremely low. They're like
Very
non-detect.
low. Right, they're very
and
low.
So they would not
support, yeah. They're very
substitute for fertilizer.
Okay.
But that's probably different. I mean, this is in a natural area. It's probably different in any community that's developed, in a watershed that's developed.
That's what we saw.
So that's a little different than someone having a well in their yard. And
we hadn't figured a way to test it inexpensively, but it's still a good idea.
Right, we should.
Thanks.
Would there, and I know maybe this isn't for our current situation, but is there anyone or can we share this information with the people that give the permitting for the reuse line? It sure would have been great like 10 or 15 years ago if we would have known that the reclaimed water we're using is this high in nitrogen. So is there any way we can share this information with whoever gives that permitting out so they can share it with water body communities wherever they are?
I met with DEP last week, and we will continue to share this information.
Okay, good, because it would have been great to know 15 years ago that this reclaimed water that is so great and cheap is not so great and cheap.
Yeah. Very true.
good. Okay. Back to the part 3, last part, groundwater monitoring study plan. So this plan is what we just initiated a few months ago, and it really is a comprehensive investigation of environmental, geologic, and social drivers of wastewater. So this is a big project that looks at the entire Brevard County groundwater. And so part of this plan is to find a scientifically valid way to map priority areas that we should be looking at groundwater or to have higher groundwater potential, pollution potential to the lagoon. It also is to calibrate and refine current groundwater water quality models using data that we didn't have before throughout the lagoon. It includes quite a bit of sampling, both using permanent wells, which is similar to what we have done at Brevard and Turkey Creek, but also engaging citizen scientists to do these push points. And I'll talk a little bit more about that and the value of this. It also includes telephone surveys of septic tank behavior, so we know how much people actually know, if they have one, if they know if they are being maintaining it, etc. And finally, investigating a pollution mitigation strategy and seeing if this strategy might work in some areas, an inexpensive strategy to help reduce some of the septic loadings. So these are the tasks through it. Just giving a little bit of, I'm not going to go in detail on all the tasks, but we have gone through the extensive effort of collecting data for the whole county. And what I mean collecting data, I mean actually looking at every single lateral to see which house is actually connected and which house is not to the sewer, and mapping, individual parcel basis. Is this a vacant house? Is this on septic? Is this on sewer? Is it on reclaimed or not for the entire county? Some data sources were very high and in quality, and some were less certain. So we also added that. So that's a valuable asset. First of all, who is on reclaimed, who is on septic, and who is on sewer, which is something we didn't have before. We have had surveys, but they had gaps. We also looked at all these variables we talked about, depth to water table, elevation itself, different types of soil variables. And we put this all together and looked at literature and decided what are some of the important parameters to prioritize and how are we going to do this. So this was done, and I'll talk a little bit about more that strategy that we use to prioritize communities. And the focus of this project was prioritize communities for sampling, to place, we only have so much money. We can't sample all the communities, so what is a representative number of communities that have higher loading potential? There's a septic tank knowledge and behavior task that's right now about to be done. It's completed, the calls are starting to come out. We have a quality assurance plan already approved and in place. And so our goal now is to install those wells. We are trying to get permission to install those wells, hopefully by the end of May, and start the sampling. So this is what we are collecting in terms of parameters. Field parameters are going to be the same as in the Brevard and in Turkey Creek. Those are typical, SOP, set of protocols by DP. The difference, some of the differences here that we have decided to incorporate is to include phosphorus. So this came up, there's very little discussion on what is phosphorus doing in this groundwater, and when we have done a few samples from the Turkey Creek, which was not in the scope, FIT was kind enough to run those analyses, we have found phosphorus numbers surprisingly, ortho especially, surprisingly high. So we decided it was important to introduce the phosphorus and understand what is going on really in these communities also in phosphorus, not just look at nitrogen. And we decided the isotopes, continuing the isotopes and understanding how those can be used would be important. So a little bit of isotopes. This is N15, again, 15N, and I just want to mention that those, numbers vary a lot depending on what you're looking, the sources of what you're looking at. So you might have, for example, plants that have N15N of -10 to 10. For example, this is the big ranges. You do have effluent manure sometimes that is, in the 10 here to 20. Sometimes those numbers are lower, so it's a big range. If you are going to pick a number, you go up and down the chart, you can see you are hitting multiple types of sources. So just using one particular number is difficult to use. This is why we have typically used those two numbers, and in this case, this is actually from a study that Dr. Soda and I have worked on for the Tampa Bay Estuary, where we're looking at totally different, we're looking at stormwater events and trying to track fertilizer, and using just N15, 15N, we couldn't tell if it was rainfall nitrogen deposition coming from rainfall or if it was fertilizer. But once we added 18O, we could clearly see that all those communities, we were able to trace that this was mineralized fertilizer that we were looking at in the water. So you really need to use that along with concentrations and monitoring for time. And I didn't go for the complexity of it. I didn't put time in there. But if you trace it through time, we did monitoring for 12 months. You could see how the numbers keep creeping up, that's what naturally happens. The numbers keep going up. So taking one point in time and comparing that is shouldn't draw too many conclusions based on one or two sampling events. Okay. I talked a little bit about, that we did a scientifically based approach to prioritize these communities, and this is a little bit of what we looked at. Our focus for this monitoring was, like I said, on single family. So we started with all the single family homes. We decided that we wanted to really look at areas that were clustered and dense enough, because for retrofit, likely you're going to not retrofit one or two houses until you have the big neighborhoods retrofitted. So we looked at houses within single family homes that are within subdivisions, and the ranking was done by subdivision and not by individual parcel. We use our extensive numbers to decide how to classify these communities. So if a community was 90%, for example, on septic, was called septic. Sometimes you have communities that have 10% vacant. And so that went into our reasoning. If you have half the community developed and the other one not, maybe that's not as high priority, it's not as dense. So we wanted to focus on dense communities, 90% on sewer or 90% on septic, and 80% or more on reclaim. Often we have communities that are on reclaim for the common areas, but not for the individual people's homes. So we wanted to capture those that actually had reclaimed all over. And then we determined what are some of the key pollution predictors, typically mentioned in the literature, and most of them are already in your plan. So you use a lot of those indicators. We ranked each of those individually, based on different numbers and literature-informed decisions. And then finally, we average those to have a prioritization score. So those are the priority parameters that we looked at. Density, we wanted as high dense as possible, but we wanted to stick with single-family homes. And the reason why we wanted to stick with single-family homes for this particular study is because that's really another variable that we can't really compare with Turkey Creek and we breeze swept. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be looking at multifamily, because it might be that multifamily, like you said, you have a lot more use and less septic tanks to retrofit. It might be best cost benefit there. So that might be something that you want to look at. Look at some of the multifamily. And I found quite a few, actually, multifamily areas that are on septic, which surprised me. The year built, so something older. So we had different periods, some of them depending on what kind of regulatory processes were available, and also depending on the age of some of the communities, you might have problems in the infrastructure. The distance, so we looked at distance to the Inner River Lagoon and also the distance to any canal that might lead to the Inner River Lagoon. So another point here to consider is that a lot of the open channels, some of the open channels are really not mapped. That would be an important effort to do, because we might be missing some of these connections. And we looked at elevation using LiDAR data, digital elevation model. And the reason why we wanted to use elevation is that it is often a predictor of water table, depth to the water table. We looked at some percentage organic matter, hydrologic group value, hydraulic conductance, and porosity. Those are all soil-derived variables. So this tells you how important soils and knowing what your soils is. And finally, mean depth to water, which is also, right now, if we don't have data, obtained by soils. So I looked at those, and I looked at mean elevation. When those correspond, it makes you feel more comfortable. So I'm not going to go into the whole how we selected, and so we basically gave classes from 1 to 6, 6 being higher pollution potential for each of those variables, and 1 being the least, and then we score these together. So the selection here, what we did was we started with trying to find groups of communities that were on interest. So we didn't want to just have one septic community over here and then a sewer community 10 miles away. We wanted to try to find high-ranking areas that were close together, similar in type, so we could do another Turkey Creek type design. And so to achieve that, we ranked the septic communities first. We picked the higher ranking communities in septic, and we looked within a buffer distance of that to find what is the highest ranking sewer community within this higher ranking septic community. So this is just an example here of a subdivision that we selected in Pierre Century area, which is right here, the Heritage Isles, right on the water. So it scored, pretty high number. And so we put a buffer around it of half mile. We looked at all the sewer communities that are within a half a mile, and we had ranks for all of those when we picked which one is the closest, most similar, with the highest rank. This is how it was done. We also picked reclaim. With reclaim, though, there's a lot fewer communities, so we had to use a 1 mile buffer to get. So what is a reclaim? So in this case, this would be your septic, this is your sewer, and this is your reclaimed community. So this is that's one location where you're comparing 3 treatments together. Does that make sense?
I just wanted to jump in. So the funding for this, there's the $1 million coming from the legislature for the big groundwater study. We obviously wanted, so they could have just picked what worked best for that study. But I wanted to dovetail that with the plan and the projects that we intended to implement with the funding in the plan. And so that red area, the north end of Indian River Isles, that's one of the Spetic-to-Sewer priorities. That's that project is where the design scope has already been negotiated. So that's one of the first projects to be funded with the plan. And so we've signed a separate task order to fund groundwater monitoring for that project, and then the legislative funds are doing the yellow and the green. So both projects will work together to provide additional data sets to each other.
So using both projects, we are able to do a lot more communities and compare and actually have more valuable data. And I do have a table that shows which communities are funded by what. It's a little confusing, but that's how we leveraged funds, because you can sample 2 of these at the same time and run them to the lab at the same time rather than drive to one and do another one. So we really try to use funds efficiently.
But do you have a date of when that project was built? The one in the red? Yeah.
I didn't bring it with me, but it's pretty old. I mean, it ranked pretty high because it was old. The soils had a lot of conductance, the hydraulic conductance. It's right on the lagoon.
Yeah.
It was probably 60s.
In the 60s? Okay.
Yeah, I think early 60s. So it did rank pretty high. But I can bring down those. I don't remember by heart. We looked at a lot of communities.
A lot of data.
A lot of data. And we also wanted to establish, in addition, controls. So we had one control in Turkey Creek that we're intending on keeping. And we wanted to look at controls in 2 other areas just to ensure that they weren't different. And so one of the controls we picked, this is an area in Titusville where we looked actually at just reclaimed sewer, and we didn't really have a good septic area for comparison. And we're picking the Enchanted Forest, escaped me. Enchanted Forest as a pretty big control area. In addition, we also have a control area set up on the Berry Island because we want to make sure they don't behave differently. So we'll have 3 controls that we can use to compare what we measure. So these are, in a nutshell, the areas that are being installed and were selected. So in red is the Titusville area. So we'll have 3 communities there. Well, 2 communities and a control, a reclaimed, a sewer, and a control. We have the Sentry area that I had just zoomed in a minute ago. We have the Merritt Island, which will be just a septic and sewer that are side by side, very similar. We didn't have any reclaim to use there. And then we have the Satellite Beach. We'll have a sewered area there. And then we have the South Beaches. We have reclaimed, a septic, and a control. So we can potentially use the one in Satellite Beach as the 4th treatment to compare with. So that's, in a nutshell, the community. So we kind of tried to spread them out as much as we could. They're all, pretty high ranking and using the same design. So this is kind of tells you which project was funded by what. I was looking at, I think, about 22 wells are being installed under the legislative project and 12 under the Save Our Lagoon. And we are keeping as well all the Turkey Creek wells in addition to that because we have so much data already on it. So those are another 11 wells. So quite a lot of wells from not having much data to we will have good data. Very briefly, citizen science. So what are we doing with the citizen scientists? Besides involving and engaging them in the lagoon, the idea is if we can figure out a way to augment our sampling without installing wells in an inexpensive way, this would be great. It also, so that's, we are augmenting the sampling at 2 of the communities, septic communities that are shallow enough, and we also are going to get enough data that helps us calibrate the model. Really, the more points we have, the better it is. So we're going to compare those data with the well data and see, can we use that? Is this something we could go and get someone to do 100 points in a day and get some valuable data? Okay, final slide. I know everyone's done. So, septic-to-sewer retrofit projects can be monitored for efficiently in a scientifically valid way. The way to do this is really to set up control, to start monitoring before you start retrofitting. Sounds from our limited data that you might, depending on the soil conditions, start seeing results faster than I expected. I really expected soils to keep in the septic to sewer conversions. So it is probably soil dependent on how fast it will flush out of the system. And the pilot study from Turkey Creek does show that different treatment types can have a potential. So we shouldn't just focus on septic, we shouldn't just focus on sewer or reclaim, we really should be looking at all of them. And there is a responsible way to address groundwater pollution, and that is to actually use scientifically valid methods to prioritize what is the highest pollution potential and to actually sample it long enough that you understand, with different lines of evidence, you understand what is coming out of that groundwater. I think that's it. Yes?
Ever since we started meeting here, we've heard various folks, Dr. DeFries and others, say that monitoring is important and monitoring is deficient. You're funded now this year in the trust fund, you're funded by the legislature. Mm-hmm. Do we have out-year funding programmed in our trust fund, and will we be able to compensate for a loss of legislative funding?
That's a good question. We'll see, how frequently, right now this is set up for monthly sampling, so, we need to do it and see what it takes to continue doing it. But we do have $1 million a year set aside in the plan for monitoring the performance of, a subset of our projects, and certainly, this is a very important component of the plan.
Well, I think there's a legitimate question. What's the right dollar amount, and where do we get it, and how do we program it, and so on. I would trust you, too, to care about that.
I just wanted to make a comment that if there's been a lot of commentary lately because of the fear of the citizens about, the condition of the river, obviously. And so people who aren't real close to what we do every day have some misinformation. And part of that is that we don't need to do monitoring, and I see that a lot. And I just want, this presentation was incredibly timely because I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to splice out your presentation and send it through Facebook, because I think the residents need to really understand why this is important. It's financially, I guess stupid is the only word that comes to my mind right now, to move forward with such dollar amounts that we're using here on projects that may not work. It would be terrible to do that. So we have to monitor. And so $1 million a year is a small price to pay to do this. We have to do this. In fact, I think it's probably not enough, but we have to do this. And so I really appreciate your work, and thank you to Dr. Soto for everything the Marine Resources Council does, because we wouldn't be able to do our jobs well without having this information.
If I could just echo that, anytime you do a corrective action work, you have to do a validation sometime down the line, whether it's 6 months, 12 months, whatever makes sense. So not to do that, you really don't know if you're successful. Yeah. And that's how you fine-tune your operations or your sampling.
Right. And thank you to FIT, we wouldn't have without their input, we wouldn't have the information we need to do the right thing. So it's good.
So 2 points. The word is irresponsible if we spend
Yes, thank you.
$500 million of taxpayer money and don't know what the heck we're doing
Right.
and don't know if we're getting results. That's wrong. I noted a number of folks grabbing their cameras and taking pictures of the screens, which is awesome. There's a lot of stuff up there. And since the beginning, all of these meetings have been recorded. This presentation is recorded. It'll be online. So all the stuff you took pictures of and the ones you missed, you will be able, and anyone in the public will be able to see this entire presentation or parts of it. And I want to thank you.
You're welcome.
Great stuff.
We're kind of the bang for buck board. That's one of the things we do. This is really fascinating. I wonder if we could get it down simple enough for a naval officer to understand and short enough to read so that we can communicate to the people that we're describing as not as well informed.
During the isotope part. I was really understanding what she was saying.
I was looking at you. I wasn't looking at you.
Well, and it's all
I still could
preliminary.
be a whole nother, discussion. I was just trying to put in that why we are doing it and why we're doing 2 types of isotopes. And
Could that be part of the $1 million we're handing out to come up with a citizens report that meets those 2 criteria? It's short and it's clear.
I think those first graphs did it very clearly to me, but it is preliminary information.
People may not read graphs. I'm going to tell you something, here's what I'm telling you, and then I'm going to tell you what I told you, and that's a pretty good presentation if you do that.
I think it would be nice if they were translated into something like a simple meme that can be spread on social media. Simple meme. Simple.
Memes are us.
The monitoring that has been done is, just simple bullets would be great. I mean, a meme would be even better. But I agree, because social media, if you're reading it right now, I feel like I spend my entire weekend defending the plan's honor from people who, just the misinformation out there. I think there's a group of people that are purposely doing it, but regardless, we still have to give the truth to the community, and I think that would be helpful if we had that ammo.
We have a clear measure that we are not communicating effectively the basic information that needs to get out there.
Yep.
And that's something we need to work on. We got the bucks there, and it's not for scientists and technicians to figure out how to get it out there. It's for communicators, public relations types, people in marketing, et cetera. And that's a skill set that may not be represented here, but it's viable.
I do know of a certain individual that has that skill set, but
It's important for us to remember that we need the science behind us, and all this is great and for scientists, but this isn't what, in many cases, won't be what resonates for the public. So we do have to tell a story, and whether it's an infographic or a meme or whatever it is, don't get caught up in that we've got to push hard and sell the science. We can't be contrary to the science, but we have to align with what the passions and the priorities of the citizens are, and it may not be about isotopes. It's not about isotopes. So, making that, recognizing that both discussions have to occur, and they're likely to not be one and the same, is really important.
Every piece of this science that matters to us and we care about needs an elevator speech. And I think that's part of the deliverables in all future studies. Give us 600 words, give us an elevator speech, give us 5 bullets that matter.
Danielle?
I think expecting someone to watch a 20-minute video is... I would like people to watch the 20-minute video of the presentation, but they're not going to. They're going to get on social media and respond to what people are saying and spend an hour responding to something instead of watching the video sometimes. And I think that conveying things in a very simple manner that people can either, 1, watch a really quick video, or 2, click on an infographic and have something readily accessible, or that the slideshows are made for public to understand easily.
Charles?
Yeah, I was going to say that there's a couple of fundamentals to education. One is make it easy for your reader, so know your audience. And the second thing is that to understand your audience, if they have misinformation, like we've been talking about, that you have to get that. You have to understand what that misinformation is and replace it with the accurate, the correct information.
Absolutely, yes.
So I have no idea what an isotope is. I mean, I fish, okay? But I made a note, fecal. I know what fecal is, and when we went from septic to sewer, it went to 0 in the groundwater. That's all I need to know. I mean, I appreciate everything you've done, and I'll ask Charles or John or one of these scientist guys to explain how the ammonia and nitrate, because I still don't understand that, but I understand when all those things drop, it worked. So there's my meme.
The last comment from my standpoint is the other is education's great and we've got to have it out there, but the other piece of any change management approach is to identify who the influencers and the trusted people out in the community are that need to be at buy-in, be on our side. I just went through a completely separate issue where the science was behind us and we were right, and the media and other issues got out ahead, and once the tone got set, it wasn't going to be changed. And we've got to identify who the influencers are and those people that might be skeptical, because let's face it, we look and feel like a government organization, because we're appointed by a government organization. There's not a lot of trust for that, so we've got to help build some trust of influencers, of people that might otherwise be skeptical, but that can stand behind what we're doing and help carry that elevator speech forward. So I think that's another component of what we have to consider.
I don't know if you guys saw, I sent around the emails and comments from the Facebook article, and I had some ideas that I was going to bring up today about that. I can mention them briefly now, or we can talk about this later, because I think we've kind of moved away from this into a little education. But just briefly, two of the things I was going to say is I was going to recommend that I think, in my opinion, it would be nice if somebody from this panel, after every meeting, wrote a little bit about what the meeting meant to them or what they went through or what they learned. And I think that serves two purposes. Not only does it allow people to see who you are so you don't seem like a government person, because we're really not. I mean, we ask questions about sunshine law all the time. I mean, really, we're not. And actually on the agenda today, there's sunshine law. Here we are. So I know it may seem like it, but I think it would be great if somebody was able, a different person was able to write in their words, what the meeting was. And then also, like the influencers, I think that I know I would be more than welcome to, and maybe if there's a list that we had of people that would be more than welcome to go onto radio shows in the area or interviews and actually go and sit down and just talk to the people and let them know who you are, and then you get to know who they are. And I think that it's that meeting, when you stop becoming a name and you start becoming a person, is when you can get the information that's needed out to people. But I do have some more ideas too, but it's just, we can go over those later.
Can we move on to the next presenter and address some of these comments at the end of the meeting?
Absolutely.
When we have our comments section where we all can talk about, and then, we can have the public comment eventually. Sure. So that,
yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. All right. So, Keith Winsten, Executive Director of the Brevard Zoo.
Thanks for that redirection, John. I think the passion on the panel, we're all like, we want to go.
I think the chair should have shock collars.
I will volunteer to pilot that.
I don't want to die.
She's got the button right.
Then he keeps a collection at home.
I got it.
So I have bad news and good news for you. The presentation I'm about to give is, the bad news is it's much less detailed and much less data rich than the previous one.
That's the good news.
And the good news is it's much less detailed and much less data rich than the previous one. In fact, I'm going to tell you a story. One of the things I admire about all of you is you come from different backgrounds, and every time I come, I see the depth and the breadth of what you're supposed to master, and it's daunting. And I'm in a part of this business. Brevard Zoo, obviously our expertise is wildlife, so we play in that side of this. But when I hear about the great work being done over here, amazing, and my brain is hurting, and I do know what an isotope is, so I understand that with all of you. So I want to give you some basics today on oyster reef, so just make sure you're fully up to date on what we've learned so far in this process. Okay? So one of the things we said when we were getting this passed is saving the RL is an and problem. It's not an or problem. We're not going to do this or this. And you just laid that out. If we do all this work and we monitor it, we'll get good results. If we pick one and don't, we might be wasting our money. So it's always an and problem, and originally it was set up with these 4 pieces. Reduce, we talked about ways to do that today. Remove, restore, and respond. Monitoring is part of that respond. We're part of the restore because there have been natural ecosystems for a long, long time that are built into these systems that give natural systems resiliency. It's like a person who has a good system for fighting off infection. If you don't have that, every infection that comes along leads to a brown tide, leads to all these issues. So you have to understand those systems have been compromised. And again, it's not an or. If you just put it at the end, you've got a weakened system the whole time. What do oysters do? And by the way, there's rich literature on this. We haven't listed it. We'll refer to one paper later. Jody Palmer, who's our Director of Conservation, will come up and talk about a few of these slides, and we have a great paper that summarizes that. But this is what oysters do, right? First of all, they do sequester nitrogen. They actually remove nitrogen from the water. Second of all, they deal with turbidity in 2 ways. They actually filter water. A really big, healthy oyster, about 50 gallons a day. I can get 200 oysters in an area this time. That's 10,000 gallons a day. And anytime you reduce turbidity, of course, you're helping one of your measures, which is seagrass growth. If there's no sunlight going through the water, seagrass can't grow. That natural system's compromised. It's going back to here. They reduce shoreline erosion. They actually capture that sediment and stop it from coming off the shore, again going to turbidity. And lastly, and this is not one of your measures, provide great wildlife habitat. And one thing about oyster reefs, if you build a reef correctly, even if the conditions don't have a lot of oysters, the reef itself becomes this little center of marine life, and it's rich with life. Not one of your measures, but we always look to oysters to do that. Factors that affect oysters. Oysters aren't going to grow if the water quality isn't right? That's one of the things. Salinity, a whole bunch of things affect that. Big thing about oysters is they start off as these little floating tiny things. They have to land on something they can attach to. So most oyster restoration is about one thing and one thing alone, and that is building the right substrate, a place for them to land, set up shop. And we'll talk more about that. You love to put them in places there are other oysters breeding and putting those little babies out in the water so you can use natural recruitment. 99% of all oyster restoration out there is based on this fact. Very rarely do you ever use any live oysters in it. We do because of the condition of the lagoon. And last thing, you want to look at shoreline profile and tribal, did I say tribal? Tidal. We've been tribal. There's tribal attributes. Yeah. But tidal attributes also work because some oysters, are exposed at some time in tidal systems. Ours is not a tidal system, so we don't look at that as much. So these are the factors. So you design the reef, basically to design the reef to the conditions. I want to talk about the project of the Mosquito Lagoon for a minute with Linda Walters at UCF. It's a very well-established project. Lots of publications came out of it. When she started looking up in Mosquito Lagoon, what she found was she had great water quality, lots of little baby oysters floating around, but there was no place for them to land. She literally did this very elegant study where she painted the tops and the bottoms of these loose oyster shells different colors, and every time people brought boats in, they flipped over. So any oysters that landed on the top would now be on the bottom, they would be dead. And she found out really it was about the substrate. She designed an oyster mat. The zoo ended up helping her putting in thousands and thousands of oyster mats. Really worked. And so that result was designed for that reef. And when we first started working with her, I said, great, let's just put oyster mats all over the rest of the lagoon. And Linda looked at me like I was crazy, because I didn't know anything. Bottom line is that is not our problem here. It's a different set of issues here. So one of the things you always see, and you guys have heard it, everyone keeps telling you, what about how we fix things in Tampa? Every system is different. Even for oysters, you have to design a system that fits those conditions. How's my story so far? No one's brain's hurting, right? If I can understand it, I think all of you can understand it. So there are some supply chain issues, and you guys have talked about them here. Oyster shell is the big supply chain issue. If you go up to Chesapeake today, they basically do a blow-and-go system for restoring oyster reefs. They have barges. They blow oyster shells up on the shore. They go through massive amounts of oyster shell and spend millions of dollars with them. We currently, because of a partnership with the county, have a decent supply of oyster shell, but we're going to run out eventually. And so we're going to have to keep an eye to the future, and we'll talk about that. Shortage of spat in the water. If you don't have baby oysters floating around, that is a big problem. And there is really no commercial solution to that. Where you see these hatcheries, the hatcheries are there for people who raise oysters to sell them. So you have other communities where they have oysters, hatcheries. As far as I can tell, they're state subsidized because they're not going to make money, and that's for commercial oyster business. We don't have that here. Up in the Chesapeake they do, in Louisiana they do. Places you see these hatcheries, they weren't set up to do oyster restoration. They weren't set up to throw millions out in the water to try to bring systems back. So we do work with them, and we have to here, but it's not ideal, as you guys have talked about, and it's expensive, and it will never get less expensive. So our solution long-term is to have viable reefs that are putting spat in the water. So I want to talk about our path to date. We started in oyster guarding 2013. Many of you were there. It was Lagoon House, I think we had the meeting, right, Lisa? Where people were outraged and some things started to happen. And we started this oyster gardening program. Already there was enough data to have a sense of where oysters would survive. And we ended up, this was great. We literally put oysters off people's docks. Gives you amazing data if oysters will survive there. And people got to raise oysters. Remember, we're wildlife people. We know how people relate to wildlife. People would make this device they're going to hold the oysters in. They would make it, they would wait, and the day the oysters came, which were literally at that point baby to little tiny oysters, they would hold the cooler in their arms on the ride home because they were worried the oysters would get hurt. People connected to oysters on a big way. Not to underscore that, we have a realtor on our board who estimated there's about 1,500 residences in Brevard County that actually have docks into the lagoons, into Banana River, into Lagoon, not on a canal. And over time, we've looked at over 1,200 of those sites have participated. Now, it's exhausting. Not everyone stayed with us. I don't want to give you the implication. But we've gotten a majority of those people who have that involved in this program. We've had started hundreds of thousands of oysters, engaged people. And the thing I love about it is we have data points. It's 1,100 data points around Lagoon that tell us where oysters will live and where they won't live. And there's no better test of where an oyster will live than trying to grow it there. We can look at nitrates and ammonia and all those things all day, but we can test it. If we put them in the water and they die, we know. So the first thing we did together was this, still funded today, still funded through the county, not part of your funding. The second piece that we did is started some pilot sites. Remember, we talked about Linda Walter and how she developed that process. We had to develop our process too. And that was funded with some state money, some county money. We've experimented with different reef designs. We started to get a sense of the real cost of this. How much does it cost to do these? And we've done it 2 years prior, and the whole point of this is to develop our process till we get to the point where we're efficient at it, because right now we're still in that calculating stage. Brevard Zoo is not a research-based institution. We partner with researchers to get this work done. We're very clear about what our role is. We're applied conservation. Year one, we had some reefs with limited success. Year two, we had a lot better success. Total of 27, you can see the number. Now I'm going to ask Jody Palmer to go up and go over our success for just a few minutes and talk to you what we've learned so far, and then I'll tell you where we're going next.
All right. So in the first year that he discussed, that was pretty much the ultimate pilot. So we worked closely with the county to select 3 sites. Those sites were selected in North, Central, and South Brevard because we really wanted to test those three locations in the lagoon. So we seeded some of those with live oysters as we were testing those methodologies. So basically what we found from that was one reef failed miserably. It just did not do well. We will own that. We had another reef which we had to go back in year 2 and do some modifications to, and then we had a third reef which did really well. So you'll kind of see a pattern because as I discuss what happened in year 2, we had something very similar happen there as well. So we came in, did multiple reefs, North, Central, and South. We found that some did really, really well, and others needed a little bit of work. So I want to talk just briefly on the monitoring and how we've gone about doing this. We do monitoring at 6 months, and then again in 1 year, and then every year thereafter. So we have brought out teammates from the county, as well as Halia Beals from the UF Extension office, and she received her master's in doing oyster work as well, so she's been involved in it. Year 1 involved University of Central Florida coming out and assisting with the monitoring because they had helped with the design and build of the reefs in year 1. So going forward, we have had conversations with the county about the zoo no longer doing our own monitoring, having a third party come in and do that, also allowing us to then focus on the reef builds and the importance of that area. But just want to talk you guys through a little bit of year 2 and what happened there. So we put in 8 reefs in 2017. All of these were seeded with live oysters except for one section of the demo site. And when I say the demo site, that was a site that was funded from the state of Florida, and it went in the Atlantic. That particular site was actually to test 3 different methodologies, so a beach type entry, a seawall, and then a riprap area. We found in that area that we went out and did monitoring just recently, and it's doing absolutely incredible. Not only are all of the live oysters that we put out there surviving and doing great, we're actually seeing a ton of natural recruitment from oysters. So in a perfect world, that's obviously what you want to see whenever you're doing oyster restoration. It helps to keep that cost down, and it makes it so that it's a lot less effort that has to go in because the oysters are just recruiting on their own. So. Want to touch on in that demo site. That was a partnership that we did with Florida Institute of Technology. Florida Tech actually recently in fall of 2017 published a paper which I would like to, if possible, provide for all of you guys to read. It's pretty amazing. It was in Shore and Beach, and basically it just talks about the study at that demo site and how the goal of it was to establish design parameters for living shorelines in the IRL. So there's some really good information in here that we would like to share with you guys. Do want to also touch on, as you probably hear us speak about often, we did have one reef that did fail after Hurricane Irma, and that was just due to the sedimentation that was moving and kind of came in and covered what we had put in. So that is something that we need to take into account. And additionally, one of the sites that we put in year 1, we went back in to do some modifications 2 years later and found that seagrass had recruited right up to the edge of all of the areas in that pilot reef that we had put in. We'd actually gone out to do some modifications per our permit, and whenever we had done the seagrass surveys 3 years prior, not a blade of seagrass was out, but whenever we went back out to do the monitoring, there was seagrass that had grown right up to all the sides of the oyster reef that we had put in. So we weren't able to do any additions there, but we were proud to be able to leave that one as is. All right, so for step 3, first major installations in 2018, and so this is what we're looking to do here in this coming year. We have 8 sites that are selected, same thing, north, central, and south, both public and private properties, covering 1.3 miles. And these sites were selected based off of water quality analysis, so we used oyster gardening information where we know oysters did survive, or we're also using information from the pilot reef and the demo site, working with Florida Tech on the design. And we do want to include live oysters in that as an insurance, just because some of those areas we do see recruitment, but some areas not so much. So we want to establish breeding reefs to power natural recruitment. So essentially what we're hoping to do, kind of to use Keith's terms, is to put in these beachheads where we know that there's going to be lots of oyster recruitment. That recruitment is then going to spread to the neighboring reefs in the nearby areas. That's going to keep more spat in the water, and that spat in the water is going to increase the survival and the success of those reefs.
Thank you. And we'll have questions at the end. The 3 things we have been monitoring for is it effective bringing the reefs above the sediment, growth of the live oysters we include, and spat. One of the other stories we like about this Indian Atlantic demonstration reef, and I'm not going to be as silly as to say this is indicative of anything scientific, but in Hurricane Matthew, prior to the reef, they had $60,000 worth of seawall damage. In Hurricane Irma, after the reef, they had 0. Now, we know they're different storms and they impact us, but we love that story. Take credit. We're going to take credit where we can. Moving forward, we have to face the fact that we're going to have a supply chain issue down the road with Oyster Reef. So we probably will be coming forward and looking at some different technologies we can use. We can use poured concrete structure for this base level. The level that's on the bottom is a sacrificial level. It gets buried in sediment. We don't expect oysters to grow there. It's a bonus if they do. So we have to look ahead. We can do poured concrete. We can take clean concrete rubble and recycle that. We really love that idea if that works. There's some advantage to keeping things in bags. Some people don't like the plastics in the bags, but the advantage of the bag is if you have kills. So down in St. Lucie County, they have kills. When they dump Lake Okeechobee and that toxic water comes in, they end up killing, essentially, killing those oysters. But if the structure's still there, then the oysters can come back and land again. So bags have some advantage. You can also put coquina in there. And I talk about this as adaptive management. That is how we try to manage wildlife. That's what we're trying to do with scrub jays. You basically learn every step of the way. So we're not coming here telling you we are experts on this. What we're telling you is we're in a fast learning phase on how to make this work in our part of the lagoon. Linda is the expert on how to make this up in the mosquito lagoon. She has mastered that. We hope to get to that point here as well down the road. And then going back to Respond, I don't think this needs, you've talked about it already. Without the third-party monitoring, then we're sort of flying blind. We can go in and do the work ourselves, but we want an objective eye to come in and look at this. And we've talked to Virginia about putting those pieces in place so that we have a third party who does it, and we can modify what we do every year. I sort of want to add with this big thought that I thought is important. Every ecosystem is different, and we talked about that. And we're going to learn what parts in different parts of the lagoon. But the other thing that really strikes me, I'm going to use an unrelated topic for a minute. And that is, we're one of many people who started a conversation about plastics a few years ago. We had the Wash to Shore exhibit at the zoo. We've started to do waste-free events. And I'm watching this ball rolling down the hill. This is from today's paper. Britain plans to ban plastic straws. That's amazing, right? France is doing it. Britain's doing it. One of my board members came up to me yesterday and said, every time I go to Murdoch's, I tell them no straws. I came in yesterday and they have a sign up that says they won't give you a straw unless you ask for it. So we're reaching this wonderful tipping point in our communities because people really care about turtles and wildlife about this. I think we're reaching our second tipping point about the lagoon. The first tipping point happened with the fish kill and led to this funding. We have a second tipping point now with the sewage overflows. And I was one of many people who didn't immediately open my arms and say, hey, come into the tent. Help us power more change. I was like, we got a plan, and the sewer things happen sporadically. I was a fool. So I would tell you this is great that we're opening up the tent to all these people who are outraged, who care. I think we have a chance to do amazing things now to take what we have, which is so significant, and every other county would want it, and add to it, working with municipalities, the county, the state, and really take this plan up to the next level. So I'm really excited about that and the potential of that. But we have to keep it as an and we have to keep it as everyone in the tent not pointing fingers at each other, but having the kind of conversations you hear today. What does that data tell us? What do we do with it? How do we react? How do we respond? So we're open to questions. I know our stuff's not nearly as tricky as the earlier stuff. So, yeah.
Is natural recruitment the only way to go forward, or can you salt spat?
We can. We have limitations.
And do you run into an exotic species issue with spat sources? I seem to recall earlier.
Spat is limited by state law where you can get it. We have one supplier of spat. We have one valid supplier of spat. And one of the big questions is it going to be a good investment to come up with a hatchery down the road? Right now, I don't know enough about it. It seems really expensive, and it seems like you have to pay for it forever. If we got to that point, I'd like to think there's enough. Right now, we seem to be okay. We're very encouraged by these early results. But if we come back to you next year and go, hey, there's no natural recruitment happening here, we might be having a different conversation.
Yeah. So before we started that first program with the zoo, we worked with the state aquatic preserve staff, and we put out spat catching devices in the lagoon to try to document is there a spat supply, or are we spat limited? And we documented that we were spat limited, and that's why we pursued this. In the early gardening years, we hung blank shells on the outside of every garden and had the gardeners check and the zoo staff as well check is there natural recruitment going on? And the answer was no, no, no. For the first 2 years, no. Last year, we started seeing a lot of natural recruitment in the gardens. And the UCF survey, Shoreline survey, found sort of 6-month-old oysters along, and Jane will show you a map, miles and miles and miles of lagoon shoreline. So when you started saying we've reached a second tipping point, that's where my brain went. We may be there, where we have put enough live oysters grown to a reproductive age that we're beginning to see that reproduction going on in the lagoon. We're at the beginning of that. We could certainly see downturns in that. You know, it may be a very rocky recovery, but there are certainly signs of encouragement. And so to invest in a hatchery that we may not need, we may just need to spend a couple more years buying expensive spat, and then we'll be over the hump.
That's where we hope we are. And you know, the conditions that sometimes are bad for the lagoon can be good for oysters, right? So all the stuff in the water, they're filtering it out. My sense was one study down at Smithsonian showed that the good news is they're eating the stuff. The bad news is they're full like in 20 minutes because there's so much stuff in the water. They don't have to filter the rest of the day, and that might be leading to some of the natural recruitment we're seeing. So,
Keith, thank you for the presentation. I'm not sure if your team looks at the commercial aspect of oyster farming up in Chesapeake Bay. I know of a restaurant chain that is so successful at growing oysters, they do it for the restaurants. They don't even supply outside vendors. That's how good they are at it.
you know, we have talked about the dream that Virginia and I have shared is that we're sitting here in 10 years, and when you go to the restaurants here, you are buying a Sebastian oyster, you're buying an O'Galley oyster, just like I'm from New England, New York. I can name the Wellfleet oysters, the Katuitt oysters. So we would like to get to that point.
And put ourselves out of the restoration.
And put ourselves out of this business. We want to put ourselves. So I'm with you all the time. We have not had serious conversations about going to it. I think people just feel it's too risky right now. But you know, I will tell you, I give this talk a lot. The two things that changes the world are disaster and market forces. And I want to get to the point that it's so valuable to grow oysters, we can get out of it, and those commercial people. So if we have people who want to try it, we haven't had, I'd love it, because I'd rather have the market drive this and not have public money drive it. I mean, that's exactly where I'd love to go.
One other thing, quick change subjects real quick. I spent a couple of years doing marine construction permitting, and I visited a few sites where homeowners in the past had dumped ceramic tiles into the water. The bottom side of a ceramic tile grows oysters like nothing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Something to think about for future, crushed or broken down ceramic
Yeah,
tiles.
the Chesapeake's using crushed toilets.
Perfect
Ceramic
New York is too.
Yeah.
We're looking at all those things. There's some permitting skepticism right now about those things. The concern I always have in our lagoon is, remember, it's 4 feet deep on average, whereas the toilets might just disappear into the Hudson in New York. You're going to see them here. So there's an optics issue here that I feel is probably not, it's unfortunately might fight the science, and that's why I like the shell bags. You can see their oyster shells, they feel really good. Down the road, love crushed toilets, love porcelain, just not sure our citizens want to see that in the water. And also the fact is you can step on. So there's some different challenges that go to the systems. I've been fighting my staff a little bit on those pieces because I just feel like the optics right now are really scary to see the oyster-encrusted toilets. We might not be ready for that here.
And we continue to look at biodegradable alternatives to the plastic bagging. Right now, those biodegradable alternatives don't last long enough in the marine environment for these oysters to grow and bridge together and become a solid reef. They break down in about 6 months, and we need a product that'll last 2 to 3 years. The companies that are working on this, they know that's a challenge. They want to develop biodegradable products that last 2 to 3 years, but they don't exist yet.
First off, Keith, I want to thank you and Jody. Last month, I went after their proposal for $600,000, which I felt was poorly presented. So they reached out to me. I went down and met with them at the zoo. If I say anything wrong, please correct me. Keith explained that essentially what you've heard tonight or today, that there are 3 pilot projects and they wanted to prove that it would work. First off, prove that we could actually grow oysters. And you all know I'm an oyster gardener. You actually can grow them. So they succeeded in that. They wanted to prove that you could put these into the water with spat and otherwise, and that works. And so now the presentation was to throw 6,800 feet of substrate with spat on them, which hadn't been done before. And that's what I complained about. It is a proof of concept. I am willing to accept spending $600,000 of public money, I certainly do it privately, on a proof of concept. I will ask that somebody who is non-related to this and doesn't have a dog in this fight goes in a year from today and tells me that spat is growing. If it's growing, I'll be honest, okay? I hope it grows, which is not a plan. I don't think it will. I hope I'm wrong, okay? But let somebody go in there a year from today. If it's growing, this is going to be fantastic. It's cheap, even though our supply chain issue is one hatchery. I'm less worried about shells. And we can continue to do it. If it doesn't work, then don't come back and ask for the money next year, because let's go back to growing oysters and spreading them around. So,
John,
fair enough?
I'm with you 100%. I mean, that's what we and I talked about. We are going to be putting some of those gardened oysters in there, but we want to see recruitment, so we're with you. And that's why we've actually requested that the county, select an independent third-party person just for that. And the monitoring starts from day one and gives update. The only caveat I would say is we're going to learn it might not work here, but it works here.
Right.
And that's what we're going to learn, how to vet our technique better. If I come back to you next year and there's no oyster growth anywhere, I don't want to spend the money. So.
On the same page. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I had two questions real quick. Keith, you had mentioned that we don't currently monitor for wildlife. Is that something that you could think of a way that we could incorporate that or mention it into the plan? And the reason is because, like John, there are other fishermen in the area and everyone complains about the lack of fishing. And not that would be a one measurement, but since we're talking about an and program, maybe that's another thing we can find a way to scientifically measure.
I think my statement there isn't monitoring as a core part of the Save the Lagoon plan. I know that Marine Resource Council, when you were looking at the report card, looked at some of the I'm not aware of an easy piece that aligns.
Okay.
We certainly do monitoring on what the wildlife is in there. Right now, it doesn't align necessarily well with the plan.
Okay.
I'd love it to align with the plan. I think it's a valuable measure. It's actually the measure people care about.
Yeah.
Right? I had a friend of my son's who a few years ago begged me for some oyster mats. We put it down. He showed me a picture. He said, I hadn't caught a redfish off my dock for like 2 years, and I put these things in, and 2 weeks later there was a redfish on them that I caught. Now, again, that's a story. I'd love to get to that point, but that's you guys to see if there's a measurement here relating to wildlife, either diversity or abundance, that we can look at here.
I do want to say along those lines, it's not sorrel, it's through the gardening program, but we get pictures on a daily basis, which we love to share through social media and on the Restore Shore site of the gardeners and the animals that they have pulled out. So, I mean, seahorses and just a whole variety of wildlife that they're finding on right off of their docks.
Okay, cool. And then the second question, it was something that I had brought up when we were talking about seagrass. I know you guys are planting the oyster beds, and since Jody said that they found seagrass growing right up against the oyster beds, is it in your purview? Is there any plans to actually do some seagrass planting when you guys are doing the oysters? Because I know last month the presenter came in and said that the quality of the water in the lagoon overall wasn't good enough for seagrass, but the question was, the quality around the oyster beds, the water is good. So if we combine the oyster beds with seagrass, would that help?
Well, let me say this. The way it's structured right now, our understanding is the money in the plan can only pay for the actual oyster substrate structure. We have received some additional funds to make a real living shoreline. A real living shoreline goes beyond that. It includes mangroves, it includes shoreline grasses. We have done a little work up in Merritt Island Airport with seagrass work. We are not the experts. That's a whole different piece that I'm not terribly confident about our expertise right now. But there is a vegetative part of this. If you're really going to create that sediment trap that stops the stuff flowing off, that traps things, that allows them, then you really do need the grasses and the trees to complete the living shoreline. So we'd love to see us going in that direction. We have high confidence in our ability there. The seagrass piece I know you're looking at, we've played in there a little piece. It seems fairly daunting to me right now. I'm not saying we won't get there. But there's a lot of challenges with it, not just expense, survivability, lots of things like to eat seagrasses, all the fish eat them. So anyway, that down the road. But we haven't looked at oyster reefs as a direct impact on seagrass as far as I know.
No, we've really spent a lot of time and effort on the shoreline vegetation, so the mangroves and the spartine and such.
Okay, cool, thank you.
And that really brings us to our next topic. Perfectly.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jane, thank you.
Let me see if, is the internet back up? I don't know. Let's see.
While she played with that, Virginia, could we look into the plan or adding something, or at least do some research into doing some wildlife mention in the plan? Or is that something we don't want to do? I know we added the other things that when we cleaned the water, the things that we were affecting. Is there any way that we could look, at least do some research into seeing whether we want to include wildlife in the plan?
We can look at that. It's much easier to say wildlife than to actually, design a study to, which of the 4,000 species that are in the lagoon would you want us to track? And different people know how to sample the fish versus the birds versus the crabs versus the benthic whatevers. And so we have some of that work going on with the FIT study related to the muck dredging projects. And so, maybe we can, let's first look at that data and see if there's a way to expand on that work since we have a baseline.
What's your favorite fish, John? Can't we just keep track of that?
I keep track of them.
Okay. See there?
She's right though. She's right. When you pull the little habitats out to clean them, there's shrimp, there's crabs, there's all sorts of stuff hanging around those oysters and the oyster shells. I mean, and up in the mangroves, if they don't develop anymore, there's still stuff in there.
So, no internet.
Unfortunately, I'm not able to connect to Esri's website today. So we developed a online map that provides some general information on living shorelines and also provides some data that we feel would be useful to waterfront property owners that are considering living shorelines. And it's an interactive map, and I was really excited to show you. But
as a follow-on to the zoo's presentation, but we'll table that, bring it back to you at a future meeting.
All right.
What website is it? We can go to it this afternoon, or?
yeah, so Brandon can send it out on the Facebook. He can send it out.
Do we know what the link is?
Yeah.
Do we know what the?
Yeah, I've got the.
Can we just, what if we can just grab it here? Can I hook you up? Can you hook up to this?
You might be able to pull it up. When we were beta testing it, it didn't work. Some of the graphics didn't work great on a mobile device, like a cell phone. Works perfect on a laptop. I haven't tried like an iPad.
So what's the address?
http://arcg.is/1A1 capital KN8. That's the link Esri produced.
K1A1 KN
8. Number 8.
But I don't think that the county's TV system is going to plug into your
I think for time's sake, we
tablet.
should table it, and all of us can go look at it on the...
Absolutely. I've been asked for us to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and have public comments. So all of you who want to speak, get ready.
I can't get it. I gotta pee.
please take your seats? We have now come to the part where we are going to open up for public comment. So if you would like to speak, come on up.
Madam Chair, is there a time limit on the public?
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Windsor. Yes, let me remind you that there is a time limit of 3 minutes for each speaker, and I will be holding tight to that to give everyone an opportunity to speak. This is not directed at you, I'm sorry. It's just general comment.
No senior citizen discount?
My name is George Rosenfield. I live in Suntree. I am an environmental scientist, retired. In the paper lately, the newspaper, there are complaints about using muck and sludge in agriculture out in beyond Brevard County due to the excess runoff. Sludge and sludge from the sewer treatment plants have always been used in agriculture. I used it in 1953 at Fort Belvoir when I left the engineer school and went to the base work to build up the denuded plateau that was Fort Belvoir. It was all clay, and I mixed it with sand from the river and sludge from the sewer plant so we could decorate plants all over the base. So it's nothing new. But when you use the sludge, you're supposed to, and they've been using it in the fields, agriculture, for a long time now. If they're worried about the drainage, they can control the drainage and the runoff, same as we control it here. They control it. They've been controlling it out there. The county is also, the county or the state or someone, it's been in the paper, is also wanting to use the effluent from the sewer treatment plants and put it down in the aquifer because Florida's running out of water, potable water, for all the people that are coming into Florida. And that's been in the paper also. Well, the normal effluent from the sewer treatment plants is Class 3 treatment, and that's not drinkable. And they want to put that down into the aquifer. And Class 4 treatment is drinkable. But nowadays they got even they're worried about viruses and other things dissolved in chemicals. Drugs and stuff that's in the water, and I don't know. I'm not up on the sewer treatment plant use, but the effluent. But years ago, you didn't have that much drugs in it. But if there's drugs in the water, even with Class 4 treatment, they should be putting it into the aquifer. So that's basically what I wanted to say. Those two items. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello there, I'm Jack Smink. I'm from Merritt Island, Florida, and I'm a candidate for county commissioner. And I want to thank you guys for your service to our community. It's a tough job you do. Virginia does a great job. But more importantly, I want to ask some questions that go a little bit beyond what your purview is. And I'm going to simplify things. We came to the conclusion here today, the people did, and have already, that we polluted the lagoon. We're polluting more than the lagoon. So each person in this county is responsible for doing a certain amount of pollution. Would you guys not agree with that? Meanwhile, we got a $500 million project here, and we want to make sure we measure twice before we cut once. Smart thinking and prudent thinking. But there's one thing you've left out. What are we going to do about the developers in Brevard County? All right? When are we going to apply some sustained growth to this county some good common sense sustained growth. Now, I'm not against growth, but I believe we should use some good common sense and apply some good common sense to the way we grow our community. This is a beautiful place to live. I'm a third-generation Brevardian. My grandfather lived over on Parnell Street. I remember when it was real easy to go out there and catch a fish and be able to enjoy our waters. And if you went out there I water skied out there believe it or not, when I was a kid. And if you fell in the water, you didn't worry about if you got some up your nose, now you're going to go right to Wusthof if that happens. So my point is, I guess, we really need to think about sustained growth. And we need to think about how all growth is affecting all of our environment, not just our lagoon. Because our wetlands, especially in North Merritt Island, are under attack. They're under attack. And meanwhile, our zoning department is rezoning things from agricultural to single-family dwellings. And they flood out there already, and now they're doing more of it. So I'm here just to mention that because I'd love to see a group like you all put together to confront and so on sustainability in Brevard County so that we continue to have a beautiful place where people want to live. And that's it, basically. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
My name is Jack Ratterman. I'm from North Merritt Island, and I'm here to this board again to talk to you about your muck removal project that's currently going forward. The county commissioners are going to vote on the 24th of this month. And your project wants to dispose of 642,000 cubic yards on 65 acres in North Merritt Island. And the people that own the land are already have some inside information because they're bringing in the dirt and digging the hole already. And a project has not even been approved yet. And this area is in a FEMA hazardous flood zone. And no one here evidently didn't look at anything or didn't think about that ahead of time. So I went to your muck fact sheet that's on the website. And it says, how does this material get here? You list a whole bunch of stuff, but you don't list anything about human waste. How did it get there? Okay, and you're pumping it out of Sykes Creek. And there used to be a lot of septics there, and there still are. Then it says, doesn't mention anything like next to the Merritt Square Mall where a lot of this is coming from. What about the antifreeze, transmission fluid, oil, gas, all that stuff that's been deposited in there over the years? That's not hazardous? But you're wanting to pump that out into our backyard. It says, what happens to the muck? And quote from your muck fact sheet online, temporarily placed in an upland area. You're wanting to deposit this permanently south of Christofoli Road in a wetland area. Then it says, depends on it says should be deposited in a landfill. Then it quotes, you have high metals in it. And you're still wanting to put this in our neighborhood. And when I go back to my community, I'm going to tell them what goes on here. You're the ones. You're going to have the blame for this. If it goes through and it's put in our community, your name's going to be put on there. And the thing that got me, I went and as record, nobody in here except for one person lives on Merritt Island. Unless somebody else, I went through the tax records, property appraiser's office, and nobody lives on Merritt Island except for one person. Anybody else live on Merritt Island? More than one? No.
I do.
Well, your name I couldn't find.
Well, I own 5 pieces of property, and one of them I've owned for 30 years in Merritt Island, which is where I live.
Who else lives on Merritt
I
Island?
grew up on Merritt Island.
Okay.
Tropical, Jefferson, Merritt Island High.
Okay, it's not really appropriate for us to be
Okay,
responding
all right,
back and
okay.
forth.
I personally am asking you to make a recommendations from this board to the county commissioner board that's going to meet on the 24th at 9 o'clock to throw out all the bids that are currently there for this project. There's 3 bids. And I'm asking you to throw all 3 out and to start over which would involve another $60,000 worth of money to put out a bid package and to have somebody go through it and do a summary like Taylor Engineering. But if you're trying to do this right, that's what I ask you to do.
Thank you. Yes.
Good morning, Mark Ryan, City Manager, Indian Harbor Beach. I'll be very brief. I apologize for being late. Dr. Listopad did a phenomenal job when I came in. Just a quick question. Are items 7 and 8 deferred, or are they going to be heard?
Oh, they're going to be heard.
Okay. Just a comment on the county utilities presentation for placing a sewage treatment plant in Indian Harbor Beach. I highly recommend that there be public involvement in that. It's one thing to move next to a sewage treatment plant or next to an airport that you know it's already there, but to place one in an existing residential area, I think the public needs to be engaged for doing something like that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Good day, everybody. Thank you all for what you do, and thank you for the presenters that presented today. I just want to say, as a resident of Brevard County, Nick Sanzone, resident of Brevard County, that I would be willing to pay more for the reused water, and that's something that I don't think is really valued enough. There's roughly only 1% of the total water on the planet that is actually accessible and drinkable. So if we want to raise that, or say that it should be raised, I'd be willing to pay double or more. So just thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Seeing no other public comment at this time, we'll move into old business.
Just so very briefly, I want to say that there aren't any problems with anybody complying with sunshine law. I just wanted to clarify an email that went out before the last board meeting where the swirl plan was presented to the Board of County Commissioners. First, I want to let you know that if Natural Resources forwards any information from me about sunshine, it's because somebody has asked me a question. And I think what happens when you don't see that question is you may lose some context. And I want you to know I'm not sitting around thinking of ways to torture you all with sunshine law. But the question arose, the swirl plan was being presented to the board, and what could the COC members do in terms of speaking? I don't really want to get into that. That was in the past. I think I answered that you could address the board and only the board, and just not engage in commenting back and forth with any COC members who might also speak to the board at that time. But an easy fix is to have Natural Resources staff advertise the COC meeting anytime the swirl plan is presented to the Board of County Commissioners. That way there's no issue of sunshine law.
Great. Thank you.
Can we expect that to happen? Would either you or Virginia ensure that any time there's an agenda item before the county commission that could engage members of this board's background expertise, et cetera, and we might attend, that it would automatically happen, please?
I think that would happen administratively, yes.
So will you make it happen?
If it is a recommendation that's coming from you to the board, then clearly I understand your interest, and we will advertise those. You know, at this coming meeting, there's going to be a septic moratorium issue that you might be interested in. It didn't come from this committee, so I can't guess everything that you might be interested in. So I would.
You're asking for direction if more than one of us think we might want to.
If you see things coming up that you're interested in, if you'll let me know, then we can advertise it as a meeting of the COC. Otherwise, I will only advertise things where it's a direction from you.
Perhaps as a protocol, members of this committee could send you a quick email that says, I intend to attend this county commission meeting, period. And if you get 2 of them, it ought to be advertised. Fair?
Christine, when there's other non-governmental meetings where multiple members of this group might be, in the past we've advertised it. But I mean, this is a government meeting that we have, a county commission meeting that two or more of us may happen to come to. If we simply follow the advice that was provided in writing last week by you prior to the meeting, and we only address directly and not in communication, do we really need to do that in compliance with sunshine law, or are we just like being really nitpicky?
No, we have to do it because none of us have given up our rights as citizens to comment and to, if need be, argue in public. Floating over all of this is the First Amendment.
Let Christine respond.
I think you have both options available to you, so it's up to you as a member. There is some constraint if you're not advertised that you can't speak through the county commission dais and speak to your other COC members. And there may be some desire to do that. One may not agree with the other. And if you want to have a debate before the Board of County Commissioners, you would need to have an advertised meeting for the COC.
Todd?
Just real quick, I think the real important part for me, there's enough controversy and there's enough going on that with a simple advertisement, we remove that as even a discussion.
Could I recommend, Virginia, that whenever there's a soil project plan, when that's coming up among the board, if you advertise that one just automatically. And then, as we were saying around the table, if there's something that we want to go to, like the Satellite Sustainability Summit, I emailed you, I said, I think there may be more people. Carol sent an email out, people responded, and that was it. So maybe if we advertise our meetings when the soil project comes up, and then others as people email. That would be my recommendation.
I'd add any budget hearings as well, since we're a component of that.
Virginia already said that she would do that. Thank you very much. County Commission direction on the update.
So you should have distributed now, it wasn't available when we sent your packet out a week ago, the memo from the clerk on the county commission action on the 2018 plan update. So the board approved the plan that you recommended, and they also directed that staff to come back to the board with a comprehensive plan to show what's going on with utilities and show sort of, more long-term goals across the board, bigger in scope than what's in the plan. And so I've been working with the utilities director trying to scope out what is that more comprehensive plan, what all does a more comprehensive plan entail. And so we don't have the answers yet, but I wanted you to know those conversations were happening.
Why does that engage us?
Because they kicked it back to us.
I don't see that here.
Wait.
I don't see any reference at all to the Oversight Committee, the Lagoon Plan, or the trust fund.
Yes, Courtney.
At the last county commission meeting, there was clearly a misconception among the community that the lagoon tax, since it did not have, that the plan did not have sewer infrastructure improvements in it, that we were all missing the boat and that nothing was being done about that. So what, I think it was Commissioner Barfield that requested this, to put an appendix of what the utility is doing with their money and their rate structure for the sewer infrastructure, so the community understood that something was being done, but it may not be paid with this tax, but that it was being addressed overall.
Precisely what I asked for at the last meeting,
right,
correct?
Exactly, basically, exactly. So I thought that was a great idea because that misconception could really be cleared up by having that just in the plan, but obviously with a separate funding source with their rates.
And that leads us right into the sewer discharge summary.
Yeah, so you also received that as well as the board received that, so you have a feel for the other discharges, some that were permitted or within their permit limits and some that were exceptions, but you get a feel for the overall extent of those releases that happened post-Irma, both from the county and the cities, and some indication of the the need, obviously, there are a number of communities that are lining pipes like the county is, lining manholes, adding generators, upgrading lift stations. There's a long list of activities happening, from lessons learned from the hurricane.
And we will be having a panel at our next meeting.
Yes. So I just learned that your member who knows the most about utilities isn't going to be here next meeting. So do you want to have this discussion when Mr. Swingle's not here, or would you rather me push that off for
Yeah,
a
I
month
have
till
a commitment twice a year to be at a utility consortium meeting, and that's next month. So.
I don't think it's timely, and I think putting it off 1 month would be better to have Todd benefit here.
Agreed, because there's some, I agree with Mark Ryan's comment, there's going to be some must-needed coordination with the cities on that issue, including possible growth patterns, because I think in some minds they're exaggerated, and I'm very concerned with constructing any plant out there that would promote growth on a barrier island. So I think, we need to come to terms with that. So there's going to have to be some meetings with the cities prior to coming up with that strategy for a plant. There's also impacts to not only Harbor, or Indian Harbor Beach, but also Satellite Beach in terms of, residents, and then also recreation facilities that are already out there. So we have a lot of discussions to have on that. So another month, I think, would be great.
You'll have your smoke test results too by then, won't you?
Yeah, most of it. Well, yeah, I think most of it will be done by then. So that would be an interesting.
In Indian Harbor.
Yeah, and they'll be in Indian Harbor by then.
But there should not be a delay or inhibition to putting together a total data sheet as we have for the 8 communities to include the county stuff. I mean, data's data, information's information. Let's get the nuts and bolts out there. And I would love to see that in next month's package, just as a data dump. And then, and that could, in fact, enhance a June discussion.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. But I think, in a month, to come up with an entire utility plan for the beach side, if it's not, because we have not met with the utility director on growth on the beach side, impacts to the residents. None of that has happened yet. So, and I know that they're still trying to size it and things like that and make those decisions, but we definitely want to do that alongside with them.
Thank you. I have a prior commitment. I have to leave, but David, the Vice Chair, is going to now step into this role. Thank you.
Scary time for all of us.
Can I ask a question about the discharges? There was one that mentioned that it was treated to reclaimed standards, and I know we talked today about the advanced water treatment or the normal water treatment, so which standards is that? Do we know?
Which one was this?
Oh, on the Irma discharge, it was Cocoa Beach.
So the reclaimed standard, there isn't a maximum for total nitrogen. There's I think it's 12 milligrams per liter for nitrates and nitrites.
12 milligrams. Okay. But then weren't we saying some of the reclaimed water in the county now is at 21 or 20?
Total nitrogen.
Total nitrogen. Okay. My lack of scientific brain won't help me know the difference, so we're good.
Brandon, we got last year this infrastructure update on all the utilities in the county, and there's a lot of improvements and stuff scheduled over a period of time with budgeting, et cetera. And I'm wondering how that compares, or if anybody compared it to the quick responses that the cities gave us on what they intend to do over the next year or 2 years in their budgets to sort of solve these problems. That's number one. I don't know if anybody's compared the two. The second, is a kind of a bigger question issue, and while it's not within my belief, it's not within our direct instructions to upgrade the full infrastructure. We need to talk about reduction of nutrients into the lagoon. That's number one. And one of the sources, one of the major sources is wastewater, whether it be from septic tanks or from our systems that are currently not putting out the cleanest water. I can't drink it, okay? I can't drink it, but we're dumping it in the river. So as the utility departments look at these sort of things, whether it be ratepayers or additional taxes or something, but I don't think it's from us, that's the only way we're going to address the problem. If we don't stop putting stuff in the lagoon, it's never going to get clean.
I would suggest that one of the things that would serve us, and more importantly this committee, more importantly serve the public, is to work towards a clear understanding of who owns what. Who has the authority, who has the funding, who has the responsibility, who are the elected officials that go directly to that. On most of the stuff that's going on right now about sewage in the community, the conversation and so on, I have a Navy radioman's response. It ain't our circuit. It is not the responsibility of this committee to solve storm-related sewage issues. We really care about it, and we have been a convener of community conversation on that. We have a data sheet now. We're going to have more in June, but part of that needs to make clear who does what in this area, and also what is normal maintenance, where does that get funded, where capital improvements come from, etc. It would be misleading to the public if they thought the place to come to talk about sewer issues was that podium right there during this meeting.
Virginia, is it fair to assume, well, maybe I should rephrase that. What do you think the commission is asking us to do when they direct you to revisit utilities in their relationship to the plan? What do you think they're asking you to do there?
They haven't asked us to do anything.
No, they asked Virginia. They asked
That's her
staff.
job. They've asked
That's what he
you,
just asked.
You know,
she didn't work for us.
If I'm making an assumption, they're asking us to either take the lead or somehow, you know, set some definitions or parameters in place where we're going to explain to them. I mean, maybe they need it fed right back to them.
I don't think any of that was, I mean, this is what I heard, because I was there.
Go ahead.
And I heard all the speakers go up and they're very upset about sewer. It's very unemotional, especially if you live on the canal and see it running by. But the residents were very confused as to why this plan didn't include sewer infrastructure. And so they didn't understand the difference between rate-paying utilities and how they're funded and our plan. So Commissioner Barfield felt it would be good if we had the county utilities strategy for fixing the discharge issue in as an appendix to the plan. So I don't think they're asking us to come up with that plan, personally. I think they're asking it to be part of the plan so people aren't confused and feel like the county's not doing anything about that issue.
Well, the letter says they directed staff to come back to the board with a comprehensive plan to show what is going on with utilities.
Right.
We ain't staff.
Yeah, we're
no,
not
Virginia's
staff.
group is.
Virginia.
I find that more confusing, honestly. If you were to present an appendix to the plan that is essentially this document from the county, okay, and the cities, I would sit and go, well, that's part of the plan because it's an appendix to the plan. I don't think we should include it in our plan. I think if the county is going to step up to the plate and fix the wastewater programs, that they should take full responsibility for it. It's their funding.
I think it's back to our earlier discussion. We need an elevator speech. And I think it's not that, I don't know that it's that hard, but it needs to be with the plan so that it's clear why it isn't in our plan.
Right.
And because it's not, it has to be, from a layman's perspective, it doesn't make sense why it's not in the plan. It's nutrients.
They don't
going to
understand the
lagoon.
difference.
So on behalf of the group, we can apologize to Virginia being tasked with this, but you have to include in that language that we're not the body.
I would just add, let's go a little bit farther into why we're not the body. We concur it needs to be addressed. We have been funded for those things that don't have a funding source. Utilities has a funding source. You know, there's 5 or 6 or 7 things that are why we agree it's important, why it doesn't fit here, how some pieces of it may fit here, such as the laterals, and why is that different? Because it's not owned by the utility and there is no funding source for it. There's a lot of complexity here. We have to tell a simple story enough to say, here's why it's all important, here's what fits, here's what doesn't fit, and why it doesn't fit, and how we see it, that there are other sources that would address it.
And there's an analog with agricultural runoff. There's like one sentence or two sentences in the plan that says that could be an important source of nutrients in the river, and it ain't our circuit. It by law we can't address that. I think a section at the end that said other nutrient sources. Here's how they're addressed. Who owns them? Here's who you talk to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're moving the utility discussion to the second month ahead. Are we bringing anything back from the second month ahead back to next month? And what might that be? Do we know?
I have not had time to think about that since this was brand new news to me. So I will look at your list of topics that you have previously said you were interested in, and I will contact the people who might present on those topics and see who's available on that date.
Can I make a suggestion? Because it's May, and we're about to go into the no fertilizer time of year by law, and there's still people out there that don't understand why. Maybe May would be a good time to talk about fertilizer and why we don't use it during the hurricane season.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
we do have one retail who's committed to coming next month. We were going to do that anyway, so we can expand on that.
Who?
Rockledge Gardens.
Oh, okay.
Not surprised.
All right.
Not surprised.
Moving forward, I think our next item is the project video. Is that accurate?
I think the county's presentation. Facilities, right?
No, we
Dylan?
we kicked that can down the road.
Okay, so while Brandon comes up and plugs in Dylan's video, I just wanted to note, I did distribute copies of the agenda that the county attorney's office put together for the county commission for Tuesday's meeting as a part of the discussion about the Lagoon plan, not a part of that motion, but the county commission did direct the county attorney's office to look at the legal viability of a septic moratorium. And so the legal department has put together a 20-page report on that, which I did not distribute to you all, but it is posted online on the county's meeting agenda packets, and I gave you just the 2-page summary report. So.
I'm trying to clarify. They use the term septic, but then at some point they talk about improved septic. Have people defined the difference between on-site systems and what we really have a problem with, the stuff that's in yards from 1950, 60, and 70? I mean, the systems today are radically different.
Many of them are very similar.
Really?
You know, the majority of, so what we've learned from the Department of Health, they've permitted 210 systems in the last quarter, and most of those are conventional septic. So the only thing that's changed since the 1950s, 1960s to today in conventional septic is the depth to groundwater required between the bottom of the drain field and the top of the groundwater elevation. But otherwise, that technology is the same, and it doesn't remove much in the way of nutrients.
It doesn't work. So
The proposed
what's proposed?
language is a temporary moratorium within that 50-meter distance that's identified by the studies in the plan, and only systems, new systems that can meet the 65% reduction of total nitrogen would be allowed during the moratorium.
Okay, I'm going to get more into that with somebody else. Thank you.
There's also a proposal, I don't know if it's that formal, but kicking around that says that there needs to be a septic inspection as element of any sale of property. I don't know if that's going to come up then or not, but it probably ought to.
That's been discussed at the state legislature, and that hasn't been successful in the recent sessions.
That one's not going to make it. I'd like.
That's another thing in the category of sources of nutrients that ain't our circuit.
All right. Video?
We are here at the Turkey Creek Dredge Material Management Area. As you can see behind me, that is the slurry coming from the dredge. They're pumping the muck material that was recently deposited into Turkey Creek as a result of Hurricane Irma. They're wrapping up. They've got a couple more days of dredging here, but as you can see, it's quite an operation. We're currently looking at another 2 to 3 days of work. And this is all part of our Save Our Indian River Lagoon program. And this is one of many projects that is currently underway that we are trying to execute to clean up the lagoon.
So that dredging is complete. The material is still being dewatered in the dredge material management area.
Since we're talking dredging, just a quick question. We've heard twice from the gentleman from North Merritt Island about the spoil site for the dredging is proposed up there. And the question I have to our dredging guy and to Matt, is there any trade space at all on the location of the spoils from that dredging, or is it set in cement? It's not our circuit, again, but I think it's worthy of at least some fact-based discussion on whether or not you can do it.
So it is definitely not set in stone. In fact, the 3 different contractors that bid on that project each proposed different means and methods and locations. The agenda item that's coming to the board on Tuesday is to reject all 3 bids and specify more about where they can and cannot place material, because we as staff have some of the same concerns as the community. We never envisioned that the bidders would propose a site with the constraints that particular site has.
Well, that says something about your RFP. Not your RFP. That says something about utility department's RFP being non-specific about acceptable spoil, temporary or permanent spoil locations.
So, yeah, part of it is definitely that the RFP was written looser than, in hindsight, than it should have. We paid a consultant who has some of the most experience in dredging projects in the state of Florida to come up with that. And so, we don't own that shortfall alone. And the bidders who submitted did not follow what was in the RFP. So
they're rejected.
That is staff's recommendation, is to reject the bids. Yes.
Go ahead, Danielle.
Can we make an advisory suggestion in any kind of capacity?
I don't think we have enough information.
I'd rather have an undiagnosed venereal disease.
Okay.
Virginia, is it fair to assuming they're rejected, a new RFP is going to be issued, better clarification?
Yes.
Issue will be remedied?
Yes.
All right.
It's also safe to assume that the actual dredging in Sykes Creek and Merritt Island, that area, will be delayed at least another 12 months.
At least 6 months, yes.
6 months.
Does that affect our budget?
It will, slide, the funds will have to slide forward to meet the revised timetable.
Is there any fine property? Oh, never mind.
Yes.
There is.
Yes. And we've met with them, and we will be negotiating.
Okay.
Can I just add one thing on it? And I don't know the details of the project, but let's also be cautious of, judging staff on that too. I hope we're doing a detailed review because these things are very complex. And I've been on the other side of being too specific and driving costs through the roof, or having problems that as staff you don't envision what the contractor's constraints are going to be. So these are real easy to go south in either direction. And so, you know, they're not knowing the details of it. I think these things will happen when you're getting into big, complex projects. We need to make the right decisions and move forward. It sounds like that's exactly what's happening.
John, go ahead. And I support completely what Todd just said. For future projects, once we've approved something here, it goes to staff, they go to the Board of County Commissioners, it gets approved there, and then they issue RFPs. We didn't write the RFP. We're not involved in the RFP process, and we're not involved in the selection of who wins the process. So I think that, again, this is one of those circumstances where people don't know where they should be seeking help. You know, we're very sympathetic with the issues that have been raised, but we can't help here.
Well,
I'm sending that out for future projects. This is not the place to come when you have an RFP issue. That, you know, it's not us.
Thank you, John.
Well, there's an easy answer. If the elected officials are making decisions you don't like, you probably ought to talk to the elected officials. We ain't that.
The other thing too is there's spoil sites all over the place where there will be. You know, we already have one that's being planned over the Barrier Island. There's some people not happy about that. But I think in general, most people have agreed that it's going to be in your backyard in the river, or it's going to be temporarily over here. And that there's a larger issue here with cleaning the river. And so while there may be a dissatisfaction with locations of some of these sites, they have to go somewhere. We have to do something. You know, I just wanted to put that on the table that, you know, yes, they're unfortunate, but we have to clean the river. That's something we have to do.
Okay. It is my hope that we get out of this meeting on time today. I'd like to move on to what would be our last item before comments amongst the members. It looks like we have a venue change.
Yeah, so the supervisor of elections, as they go into election season, they take over many of the meeting rooms in the county, and this is one of those rooms. So we have secured the
Space Coast room on the second floor of this building.
Yeah.
Yes.
So down one floor, center of the building, Space Coast room, and that'll be, you know, reflected on your agenda. We'll probably stick a note up here on the doors or elevators or something for July through November. We have coordinated with SCG-TV. They will be bringing in additional staff because that room is not set up for televising the way we're used to having that. So they're going to make that happen for us downstairs.
That'll be effective in July.
Yes.
Okay, and is there any final comment amongst the roundtable?
Yes.
John.
I want to go back to this business presentations we get here. I think we ought to put a stake in the ground and say that any information-laden presentations come to us come in two parts. The second part is the presentation. The first part is the speaker makes crystal clear with slides or song or anything else they want what this presentation means to the future of the lagoon in layman terms. And I think that should be a standard for every presentation that comes forward here. Tell us why this matters and why we should listen to it and what it means in lingo and language that's accessible to the average citizen, and then go ahead and tell us what it is.
And you
could be the gatekeeper on that, Virginia.
Do you mean different than a summary?
Hey, I don't care what you call it, but I go back to the golden age of Polaris patrol submarines, and there was about a 200-pound data package. We reformatted the report that came out of that says you've got 3 pages that are blue and they're in the front. Everything else is crap in the back. We need to have something that says, here's why we need to listen to this in terms, basically getting down to, how's this going to fix the river?
Thank Thanks, John.
I like that concept, but could we flip it and have it come afterwards? Because we have a ton of discussion here that sometimes shifts and we provide all of our input. And I think we've got to translate it into that, but I think it's going to be harder for a lot of the commissioners to envision that before.
Well, why not the old formula that I mentioned before? Here's what I'm going to tell you. Now I'm telling you, here's what I told you.
You know, next month, we have someone from Rockledge Gardens coming to speak. I don't know what their presentation skills are. I don't know, their ability to take their information and put it in the format that you're most interested in. I think after the fact, that is something that we could contract with some sort of, communications consultant on how to package that in a way that's meaningful to the public. But to try to expect that bar from every presenter, I'm struggling to, think how we could do that effectively.
John, you could always ask at the end of the presentation.
We could ask if they need to do it.
I got it.
I think we're converging on something that we need.
I think, because I have to say, I use that dashboard every day.
I do too.
In responding to people on Facebook. I
do
do,
too.
every day. It would be even greater to add the monitoring data to that dashboard. It's so great, and once I introduce people to it, they just love it. So thank you for putting that together, and I think if we did that for, some of the studies that were coming out and rolling out, it would just add to that. It would be great.
Do we have anything else?
I wanted to, first off, I hope no one was offended with the article I wrote on the committee by speaking in anybody's, or putting words in their mouth.
I thought it was great.
There were some things that came from it. I sent you all the email comments and the Facebook posts so that you guys could, so that everyone could hear what the community was saying. And some of the things that I took out of it that I found interesting. First off, there always has been a big question about this flush and getting more ocean water in to flush all the water and bad stuff out of the lagoon. Virginia, I don't know if there's a way that we could put something together on an agenda or a presentation. I know Dr. Weaver at FIT, who's a flow specialist, I know we had his video come in when we were working upon the armoring of the seawalls, but just something to address it, to get some questions out, answered, and to get a resource that people in the community could reach out to ask. I think that would be good.
Or a summary of more questions we need to answer.
But that's the thing, is you don't know what you don't know unless you think about it.
There's a lot of questions.
That might be a highly attended meeting as well when we have that. I know that's a very hot subject amongst people who use the water recreationally and professionally. So.
Yeah, there is a 15 to 20 person email group going around, a lot of whom have many letters behind their names, and they're discussing not using the term flushing, but some use of circulation through seawater. And I suspect that a number of those people would be more than happy to join a presentation and to share why or why not these ideas make sense. It's actually really interesting. I'm not commenting, I'm just reading.
I want to invite Dr. Freeze up here real quick. You have something to say? You missed out on the earlier public comments.
Mr. Chair, Dwayne DeFreeze, Executive Director of the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program. Sorry to jump out of line on this, but I wanted to at least let you all know that on Friday last week, my board directed me to begin to coordinate with the federal, state, local, private, university, all the players who have been discussing, I hate to call it flushing, I call it ocean-enhanced circulation, but it's going to be flushing no matter what we want to say, because it's stuck. There are some opportunities. They are all complicated. They are all expensive. And the disconnect is that everybody thinks it's a quick fix. It's actually long. If we had all the money, all the science, the proposal ready right now, we could be 2 to 4 years in permitting on this because of the locations. But what I'd like to do is just when we're ready, I've got a stack of information that's 3 inches thick already from all the players. We'll bring it back to you all for a presentation.
How much time do you need?
This is actually going to be heard at Port Canaveral on Tuesday from their perspective. I don't think we need a lot of time, maybe that June, July, or the next issue, but the fact is, this isn't going to happen fast, even though people want it, because it is super complicated, both in risk and in opportunity.
Well, that's kind of my point, is if it's going to take time, let's dig in now and at least have that time to be able to do the research if we need to.
My board instructed me, not like I needed any more work with a staff of 3, but to take that point, because this circular argument has been going on 10 years, John? Maybe longer.
At least.
Yeah, 35 years. I mean, this is always comes up when we have water quality problems.
Thank you, Dr. DeFries.
And then there were 2 other things. One of the comments that somebody said is that we have replaced the public's voice, that we are their voice when speaking to the county commission. And I know personally, I'm speaking for myself, I don't feel that way. While we are oversighting and looking at the way the funds are spent and making recommendations, we still need the community not only to speak to the county commission but also to speak to us. Right. So we're not taking anyone's voice. We're looking at the money, but we still need everybody's voice to help us. And then the final thing was, and I'll get with Brandon and we'll try to come up with some brainstorming on some more PR stuff, because somebody said we have a PR problem. And I know it was nice in the beginning, and I know Dave's back there from Florida today. It was great. We had articles. The first couple meetings, every meeting we had an article. This is what happened at the meeting. This is what happened at the meeting. And then obviously news happens and other things happen and you get stuff. So people start wondering, well, what are they doing at the meetings? What are they doing at the meetings? And that flow of information wasn't out there. So I think we can come up with some ways to try to make sure that flow. Did I have a 3-minute timer? What's going on, Carol?
My clock shows 1 minute.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. The importance of education. That's the last thing, because that's the information we're getting out. And what the education is going to do is the education is going to take a 10-year plan and extend the money we're putting in now to 20 or 30 or 40 years by affecting behavioral patterns. That's the value of education. We've got a 10-year plan. If we do it right, the behaviors will last 30, 40, 50 years on to the next generation. And that's the importance of education.
20 seconds. Anybody? We are public comment is over. Thank you all for attending. John, quick.
Point of order. The chairman said we would have public comment earlier and then said we would have the normal public comment. That's what she said.
Yes. Yes.
That's what was said.
That's what was said. That's what was said, and I'll ask the secretary to go back and read the motion if need be. I believe the public is...
I'd have to listen to the motion. She did say it.
Yeah, she did.
She did.
I believe the protocol was to handle it as many.
How many more speakers do we have? Do we have any more public speakers today? We've already had.
He's already
spoken. Do we have any more?
Speak twice.
Does anybody here wish to speak that hasn't spoken yet today?
I'll speak again. I went through your rules, and your rules say that we can speak twice, once on a general item and once on a second item. We have 3 minutes. And to me, this board is trying to kick the public comment out and the community out of your decisions. I'm on a zoning board, and we asked the audience 3 or 4 times, do you want to speak? And you are not being forthwith on this.
Jack, is that what you wanted to say?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you very much.
Can I just respond real quick?
Sure.
She was clearly trying to expand the amount of times people could speak by adding it in the middle of the meeting and then also having it at the end. So I don't know why things have gotten, adversarial with that, but I mean, that was my interpretation of what Chairman Ely was trying to do. So
I understood it to be an overflow.
Before I motioned for more time, I wanted to see if there was any speakers. So
there he is.
Go ahead. You've got 30 seconds.
You can't flush the Indian River Lagoon with seawater. It's brackish water. And any more than you can flush it with fresh water after a hurricane. It's too fresh. It has to be a certain amount of salt in it.
We're going to have a presentation on that. You'll be welcome to speak then.
I'm not a specialist.
Thank you all for attending the meeting today. I appreciate everybody's efforts. This meeting is adjourned.
good chairmanship.
The Opinions expressed by any member of the public during any period of public comment do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, or the program sponsor, and are solely those of the presenter. The Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, and the program sponsor hereby expressly disclaim any and all responsibility or liability for any defamatory or slanderous statements expressed by any member of the public during any such period.